I think you all know my name's Jacqueline Fitzgerald. I don't know all of you. Some of you I do. And I'd like to start by thanking all of you for coming. And thank you to Joe McBride, Ken Mate, and Jerry Perry for helping me co-host. It's great to see everybody, and I'm really looking forward to the celebration of Michael's life. I want to start out with my comments, and then we're going to play a video tribute to Michael. After the video, we'll have some speakers, friends and colleagues whom I'm honored to have participate. They'll be sharing impressions and memories of Michael. And then we'll open up the program to some other people. I knew Michael for more than 20 years. We were colleagues at the Chicago Tribune, and we hit it off, and we spent a lot of time together. And we dated. Long story short, we stayed really close friends until the very end. Michael died on January 6th, which was the same day that Peter Bogdanovich and Sidney Poitier passed away. So he was definitely in good company. And when Michael passed away, I was holding his hand. I would tease Michael about being a brooding Swede, but in fact, he had a terrific sense of humor, and he was a lot of fun to be around, whether he was tossing off a dry one-liner or he was being goofy and off the wall. He was always a great comic. And he was endlessly curious, so he had a lot of interests, and a lot of things that he liked to do besides movies. But he wasn't a planner by any means, unless it involved going to a movie. That was a little bit different. But I think the reason that he wasn't a planner is because he lived so completely in the moment. And I think the best example of that I can think of is in 2013, he moved back to LA. He had lived here previously, and he moved back. He called our mutual friend, Paul, and they're chatting, and hi, what's new? Michael says, I've got some big news. I'm moving back to LA. And my friend Paul says, well, that's great. Let me know when you get here and we'll get together. And Michael says, well, actually, I'm at LAX. Do you think you could pick me up? So that was kind of how he rolled. And I'm thinking that some of you might have similar Michael stories that you'll share, and I look forward to hearing those a little bit later on. I also wanted to say that I've been really touched by the people who stood by Michael when he got sick, and by everyone who has expressed support and been there for me since he died. I'm very, very grateful. It really means a lot. When Michael first started having health issues, Dr. Stephen Copen, Dr. Colin Stokel, and Dr. Madune at Cedars-Sinai really helped him be able to hold his own as best he could. I think most of you know he struggled with Parkinson's disease. And then in June 2020, Michael fell and he broke his hip. So he was incredibly stoic. I don't remember him complaining at all. And he endured 2 surgeries and a long stay in rehab. And I wanted to extend thanks to several people who helped out while Michael was putting up with rehab. Paul Wertheimer, who really went above and beyond. His friends Sue and Steve Wan, Mike Riano, Gerard D. and his team, Ken Mate, Henry Schipper, Jane and David Kaplan, Ann Brennan, Janet Carper, Stephen Goldman, and of course the wonderful Mike Yates. Thank you also to Michael's cousins on his mother's side, the O'Keefe family. I'm just meeting you now on Zoom, so it's great to meet you, and thank you for your help in helping me make the final arrangements. Also, some of you know this, but for those who don't, I wanted to mention that the University of Wisconsin at Madison now has a collection of Michael's papers. They're pertaining to his writing career, and the papers are being archived at the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research, which is one of the world's largest archives of research materials relating to the entertainment industry. So thank you to the center's assistant director, Mary Hulsbeck. She established the collection, and she made it so easy and efficient. She was just great to work with. And you might be wondering, where did those papers live before they made it to the archive? Well, they were in Michael's storage units in LA and Chicago. So a big thank you to Mike Riano, Bud and Kim Young, Dwight and Stacy Irwin, Jean and David Kaplan, and Paul Wertheimer for all the hard work in clearing out and archiving Michael's storage units. There was just so much stuff. It was a huge job, and it turned out to be both tedious and fascinating. Mike, Bud, and Dwight are making a documentary about Michael, and I'm sure they found great material both for their film and for the UW archive. We're still in the process of shipping some of the papers there, but we're getting very near the end. So the video that I'm about to play was created by Bud, and some of the scenes will be used in the final movie. Also, last but not least, I'm working to set up a scholarship fund in Michael's name at UW-Madison. So if anyone is interested in getting more information or you'd like to contribute, please let me know and I can fill you in. I do have pledge forms from UW. So just let me know if you're interested in helping me spread the word about the scholarship fund. You can email, text, call, message me on Facebook, message me here, however you want to contact me. I am looking forward to making this happen. And now Ken Mate is going to speak briefly about spending time with Michael in Michael's last few years. Ken?
Yeah, and actually, let me also call on, and I'm going to turn it over to David and Jean Kaplan, who also spent time. I used to cross paths with them, taking Michael to various premieres or screenings, and they did as well, or they would take them and I would pick them up or something of that sort. And also Henry, if you're on, Henry Shipper, also had extensive time that he spent a few years, and we all know he didn't move very well, but his mind worked pretty well, and he was always had a wide range of knowledge and was always very pleasant. You know, I mean, I knew him for 50 years, so there's nothing that particularly stands out to me over the last 5 or 10 years that didn't exist earlier. I will tell you this dates back 50 years, but why not? Because I may not get my chance to speak. Then one time, Pat McGilligan and I were going over to Michael's to pick him up or to see him for one reason or another. He had just finished shaving. And Pat, in his usual fashion, pointed to a spot on Michael's cheek and said, Michael, you missed a spot. Michael looked at Pat. He said, does that bother you, Pat? Does that really bother you? And that's an example of Michael's sense of humor that he maintained until the end. Now, let me throw it open. Oh, the other thing is that even though over the years, when I would pick Michael up and we would go to a screening, we went out and ate at any number of different places, Musso's or Italian restaurant or something. The thing that Michael really liked, and ultimately it got much easier to bring Michael back to my house, pop a tape or pop a CD into the player and watch a film here. Michael always appreciated and never varied from one request, which was a burger and a Coke. That's what he wanted to eat, basically. So I was happy to serve him that. And every time I brought him over here and we watched the film, Michael would turn to me and he would say, did you enjoy the film? And I think it was his way of saying, look, you've done something for me. I want to know, I'd like to know. I'm here offering you this enjoyment. I hope you enjoyed it. It was his way, I believe, of trying to pay back. He was always a liberal-minded guy who tried to do the right thing, which is a rare thing in this world, notwithstanding the fact that he had an extensive reputation as a curmudgeon. But if Steve Wan is on, or David and Jean, please chime in and say a few things about Michael over recent years.
Well, I'll follow up on your comment, Ken, about that he didn't move very well. I specifically remember going to a screening at the fabulous El Capitan Theater here in LA on Hollywood Boulevard. And Jean and our daughter Olivia went to get the car to eventually pick me up at Michael's place because I escorted him from the theater to his apartment. And he moved pretty well across the crosswalk on Hollywood Boulevard. I don't know if it was a fear of getting run over or whatever, but he motivated pretty well.
He did that at that point in time, but then, you know, it got progressively worse, but he was always up for screenings and he just couldn't understand why the screenings weren't happening during COVID. He just couldn't grasp why there weren't any screenings. But Also, the burger and the Coke, Ken and Jacqueline, chocolate cake.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Yes,
good Lord.
yes.
Oh my God. We would do grocery shopping for him, and we always made sure we included like the little chocolate cakes, like almost like an individual, but not, you know what I mean. Anyway, so yes, Michael and his burger and his Coke and his chocolate cake, hilarious. But he was a walking encyclopedia of films, just walking encyclopedia. He could recite anything. He knew anything. One day we went over to visit, and Jacqueline was there with Paul, and we were talking about High Noon, and I know the song, so we both broke out into the song from High Noon, Don't Forsake Me, Oh My Darling. It was hilarious. Anyway.
So Ginny, you have a beautiful voice.
Oh, thanks.
So I'm gonna hold off on more shares because we're gonna see the video, and then we have our speakers. So let's watch the video now.
The first film I can remember seeing, which was Cinderella. The Walt Disney version of Cinderella, which I believe came out in 1950, so I would have been probably three or at the most 4 when I saw it. And this is the first movie I can remember being taken to. And what happened was, I remember my memory was still very vivid because I can picture this huge, vast theater, and everything is really big, of course, when you're small. And I was there looking at the film and was kind of really hypnotized by it. And then onto the screen came that huge evil cat, Lucifer, who would have been, in my mind, hundreds of feet high or something like that. And I was so terrified that I ran out of the theater, and I couldn't be persuaded to go back into the theater. So my first contact with movies was so violent and to me so terrifying that it kind of, sent me screaming out of the theater, which is ironic in a sense. Here was my first encounter with Citizen Kane. I would have seen it probably when I was about 12. It was playing on TV one night. It was playing late at night, so I couldn't normally see it. But I found out about it. My mother worked, so she would have gone to bed early. She was in the living room on the right-hand side, and that's where the TV was. So what I did, so I turned it way down so it wouldn't wake her up. And I got very close to the TV. And I still remember it, the way it began, and how astounded I was by the richness and the depth of the shots, of the storytelling, of the 4-part story, all these different perspectives, all these great deep focus shots by Greg Toland. And it just completely floored me. It just knocked me out. It always does. The amazing thing about movies and the beautiful thing about a movie theater is you can pop into one no matter where you are, and they can transport you everywhere, make you feel everything. They don't do it all the time, but they can. So no matter what happened that was bad in Chicago, no matter what rotten things we all went through, not just me, there's always another movie theater to go into.
Everybody's a dreamer, and everybody's a star, and everybody's in movies. Doesn't matter who you are. There are stars in every city, in every house and on every street. And if you walk down Hollywood Boulevard, their names are written in concrete. Don't step on Greta Garbo as you walk down the boulevard. She looks so weak and fragile, that's why she tried to be so hard. But they turned her into a princess, and they sat her on a throne. But she turned her back on stardom, because she wanted to be alone. You can see all the stars as you walk down Hollywood Boulevard. Some that you recognize, some that you've hardly even heard of. People who were suffered in vain. Rudolph Valentino looks very much alive, and he looks up ladies' dresses as they sadly pass him by. Avoid stepping on Bela Lugosi, 'cause he's liable to turn and bite. But stand close by Betty Davis, because hers was such a lonely life. If you covered him with garbage, George Sanders would still have style. And if you stamped on Mickey Rooney, he would still turn round and smile. But please don't tread on dearest Marilyn, 'cause she's not very tough. She should have been made of iron or steel, but she was only made of flesh and blood. You can see all the stars as you walk down Hollywood Boulevard. Some that you recognize, some that you've hardly even heard of. People who worked and suffered and struggled for fame. Some who succeeded and some who suffered in vain. La 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 la, la 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 celluloid heroes never feel any pain. Celluloid heroes never really die.
So we're going to go on, Bud, thank you very much for creating that video. It was wonderful. And now we're going to go on to the first of our scheduled speakers. I'm so glad and honored to have Chaz Ebert here. Michael was a big fan of yours, and so am I.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for having this memorial service for him today. It was really interesting to see some of those images that came up on the screen, because it reminded me of a side of him that sometimes we may not have gotten a chance to see very often. When Michael first came to the Chicago Tribune, I think he thought there was going to be a rivalry between him and Roger. What he didn't know is that Roger always reached out to help the other film critics. Roger never really saw himself in competition with anyone except Gene Siskel, and that was because of their TV show and because of the times that they started back in the 70s, when people tried to encourage that kind of competition. After that, and then actually Roger and Gene became like brothers. After that, Roger would do everything he could to help the critics. And I remember when we would invite Michael to go out or do something, at first he was initially maybe a little skeptical about, why are we doing this? He didn't know that was just Roger's way. That's just the way he interacted with people. And it was actually Michael's mother, Etna, who got Michael to relax in the relationship and just accept it as a friendship, because we adored Etna. And Etna and Roger and I would talk, and Michael saw that was genuine. The relationship with her was genuine, and we thought that Etna was smart and funny, and interacting with her gave us more insight into who Michael was. Growing up with someone like her, I mean, I don't know if some people knew that Etna had made films like in the 1930s and the 1950s. She actually did a documentary, I think, called Creative Hands, about artists through history. And so I think that Michael, she also did like little short films, like one about ladies' hats. And she did a film like a tracking shot of people walking up State Street in Madison, Wisconsin. And so it was Etna. Etna loved Shakespeare. We talked about, and she would write us little notes, and her little notes were so literary. We learned more about Michael by interacting with his mother, and so much so that when she was sick and she wanted us to visit her, Michael said his regret is that, well, I'm not going to even tell you what he said there because it was very personal. But you know, the regret that I can say is that he regretted not encouraging her to get cataract surgery so that she could see the films better. And sometimes people would say, why did Michael sit so close in the screening room? Well, part of that is so that Etna could see the films better because of her cataracts. So he was just a loving, devoted son to Etna. And when she passed away, he asked us to speak at her funeral. We were very happy to do that because she was lovely. The other thing is when when we when we interacted with Michael, it was more not so much about the movies. Oddly enough, it was more about life itself, because Michael would find some interactions with people puzzling. And so he would come to us for advice. How do I relate to this person? Or how do I do? Or sometimes, I mean, the thing that's funny is Michael was a little combative sometimes. I know that he actually got into a fist fight with someone, and he actually had some emails that he would send to us, and Roger would say, I don't think you should send this out to the whole Chicago Film Critics Association thing because this may not, it's not going to win you any favors with people. And so he would laugh and say, well, maybe, I got a little heated about this and so I'm just thinking, to prepare for the talk today, I was reading back through some of our email exchanges, and one in particular where I'm glad we talked him talked him out of doing something that we didn't think would have been very diplomatic. Michael, of course, as we all know, was very smart, and as Jeannie said, he was a walking encyclopedia of movies. And he also, because he had his background of acting at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, he he loved, even though he came across as shy, and he was a little shy, but once you really got to know him, he loved doing something either for the camera or on stage. And so one of the disagreements we had is he came to Roger and asked, why didn't you choose me for, doing some of this stuff for the television? Is it because of my looks? And Roger said, of course not. Look at me. Look at Gene Siskel. No, it has nothing to do with looks. But Michael had a condition called spasmodic dysphonia that made his voice hard to hear, sometimes to project and understand. And Roger said, I have to tell you, it's, you have, to do broadcasting, that people have to be able to understand what you're saying, and you have to project your voice. And so he said, okay, all right, then that's fair. And interestingly enough, when Roger was losing his ability to speak, Michael was the first person who came to us and told us about this speech guy, Gary
Katona?
Katona. Yes, thank you, Katona. And it was something that wouldn't have been, that Roger was not able to make use of, but Michael, it was a very loving gesture for him to do that. And, I really appreciate him for that. The other thing that as I was going through some things, it was, when he talked about when Etna died, he wanted to make sure he had her in the appropriate clothes. And he said that he was looking for, she had like a black velvet jacket and black velvet pants that she loved wearing to film festivals and film galas. And she said those were the happiest times of her life. And he couldn't find those. So he wanted to go buy something expensive. And he said, no, I don't think I should spend a lot of money because my mother knew how to look beautiful and elegant in something less expensive. And I think that I should honor her that way. And he just wanted to make sure he did the right thing for her. And I think that's really what he wanted to do in life. Michael loved getting dressed up, not every day, but when he came, we helped him the first time he came to the Cannes Film Festival. As you know, Jackie, he wasn't very organized. So we had to map out step by step for him what to do, how to find a place to live, how to get in the line to get their credentials, how, where you went if you wanted to go to the black tie screenings, where you went to go to the critic screenings, all the press stuff. I mean, in really little detail. And so Michael, between you, Jackie, and Brenda Sexton, I loved seeing his relationship with you women because Michael also adored women, maybe because he was raised by such a smart mother. But he loved getting dressed up, and when he would put on his black tie and we, get his hair done, we give him these compliments and he would just shine. And, I'm sure, he's shining wherever he is now. And Jackie, I just want to say thank you because he was so appreciative of the relationship that he had with you. And that was his connection to me. His greatest humanity was when he was in a relationship with someone, whether it was the romantic relationship or friendship relationship. And I think with women, because like I say, I think it's Etna's influence, but he really blossomed then. And I'm so sorry, I probably took up too much of the time, and I have to
Sure
run
did.
because I'm going to the airport, and I can't now. And if I don't leave now, I'm going to miss my flight. So you're recording this, and I'll watch it all later. Thank you so much for doing it. Mwah.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Chaz. Thank you so much. I so appreciate, I know you had a tight schedule today and you're catching a flight, so I really appreciate you making the time. And I will just quickly add, Michael did, for whatever reason, did sometimes need a little help dressing, as Chaz alluded to. And I always remember at one of the festivals, I had helped him pick something out, and we ran into Ann Thompson, the film writer and critic, Ann Thompson, and she noticed that he had his tie tied, and she said, well, it's definitely a step up, because usually, I always remember, she said her exact quote was that usually Michael had a bizarre approximation of formal wear, and this was an improvement upon that. So I'm sure you helped him, as you said, as well. So thank you so much.
Right. Bye-bye.
That was beautiful, Chaz. That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
It was. Next, I'd like to introduce Leonard Maltin. Really doesn't need an introduction, but he's a film critic, film historian, and author. Leonard.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to participate, although I feel underqualified because I really didn't know Michael all that well. I was not part of the Madison scene and not Chicagoan, but I did get to know him here in LA, and we were both members of the LA Film Critics Association. And when he returned to LA and our group after a sojourn in Chicago, I didn't understand why he was so quiet, why he so rarely raised his hand to participate in a discussion. And finally, we were at a screening together, and Jackie, my wife, took you aside and said, "What's going on with Michael?" And you explained. So I also deal with Parkinson's. And my wife's theory is if he'd been married to someone like her, she would have nagged him sooner to deal with it, and continued nagging. And God bless my wife for doing it. I always read and respected him, and I was very sad when the LA Times didn't give him the space, literally and figuratively, he deserved, because his writing was so good and so well informed. Key point there. And I was witness to a very bittersweet moment toward the end at the last Turner Classic Movies Film Festival, which I think is 2019. And Alice and I were in the lobby of the Chinese Sixplex, the Hollywood Highland complex. And Michael had gotten himself there for a screening, and with no stated plan of how to go home. He didn't live that far, but he at that moment was in no shape to walk. He could barely stand, and we, seeing this, we couldn't just leave him to his own devices, and we didn't know quite what to do. And I work with the Turner Classic Movies folks, and I went to one of them and said, "We have to help Michael get home." And and how do you explain to somebody that this person who you're seeing in a diminished state is a really significant person in the world of film and film writing? I did my best, to, in a very abbreviated form, to tell them that he was worth the trouble to deal with at this troublesome moment, and at this vulnerable moment. And one of the good folks there got a car, and Alice and I were able to get him to his front door, and see him home. And but that's how determined he was, despite the hurdles in his path. And he was back the next day. God knows how he got there, but he was there. And I so admired him. I so admired his writing and the work he did with Joe McBride. And I hope I helped repay him just a little for all the pleasure he gave me, and the stimulation from reading his writings. And God bless him.
Okay, thank you so much, Leonard. I really appreciate that. That was beautiful. And the next person that we have to speak is Myron Meisel. Myron is a producer, filmmaker, film critic, and theater critic.
Oh, hi. Yeah, the first time I met Michael was either 1971 or 72 in Madison. I think we were introduced by the very dear Susan Dalton there at the Film Study Center. And the first time I met Michael, he was the worse for wear, having emerged from some kind of fist fight. So that was turned out to be a lesson for me in not trusting first impressions, because I discovered over the years that he was far more the lover than the fighter. Everybody who knew Michael knew that he was capable of being very stubborn, but there was a flip side to that, which was actually far more important, which is that he was pugnacious, and his commitments, well, he did. It's funny, there wasn't really a spectrum with Michael. He was either at one end or he was at the other. But once he was in favor of something or supportive of something, whether it was a movie or a person or whatever, he was always all in and unyielding. I didn't really get to know him particularly well until he moved to Los Angeles, but then we spent a great deal of time together. My first impression reading him in the Times was that he was the more contemporary incarnation of Roger Greenspun, who had fulfilled a rather analogous role at the New York Times over the years. And that Michael was had the very good luck to be assigned the movies that were most neglected, which of course were what he most enjoyed championing. Another thing that distinguished Michael in my mind is that out of many critics, his almost complete lack of concern for sounding clever. He was obsessed with getting things right, with being persuasive, with making his point. And one thing I was particularly fond of is his relative disinterest in writing about films he didn't like, and his strong preference for finding a way to search out an expression of that quality that made a movie good. Part of that loyalty that I experienced personally was he became a real champion of It's All True, which may not have gotten quite the same traction without his dogged advocacy. I do remember taking him to dinner at Musso's and Frank's, which was an exercise in frustration because neither the menu nor the ambience made the least impression upon him. Despite much importuning, we did end up with a burger, fries, and Coke. One of the things about Michael that I should say I rather envied was his apparent charisma, in that he had an uncanny ability to attract a great succession of incredibly intelligent and capable women throughout all the times I knew him, whether it was Ursula or poor Marjorie, and culminating in Jackie. He had good taste in many matters. I did especially enjoy in the video presentation being reminded of his presence in Dan Salit's first film, Penny Perverse, which I remember well, but I had forgotten his part in it. And that collaboration with John Doerr's Easy TV operation is a very forgotten part of history, but was really seminal in creating the entire concept of video as a narrative art. And I had forgotten that Michael was present at the creation of that as well. Michael could gyrate between being highly insightful, intensely insightful, and utterly obtuse. And there didn't seem to be much in between range. But people who cared for him learned to have a great deal of affection, both for his strengths and his shortcomings, because they were all inextricable from one another. So I dearly miss him.
I miss him too, Myron, and I'm very touched by your comments. I know we've been to many movies and with so and Frank's dinners together, and it just brings back a lot of memories. So I'd like to welcome Patrick McGavin, who is a film critic and wrote Michael's obituary on RogerEbert.com.
Hello, everyone. I'm Patrick McGavin, writer in Chicago, and Michael was a dear friend. I think I have so many great memories, and it's almost impossible to encapsulate or summarize it within the narrowness of this format. But Michael was one of a kind. He was, in every sense, I know it's an overused phrase, but he absolutely did contain multitudes, as many of the other speakers and friends of his have talked about. And our situations paralleled each other in many ways, because as a private contractor freelancer, I was trying to make my way in this world, and it's difficult doing that, especially in a market like Chicago, which is pretty rigid and kind of closed to outsiders. It's amazing, and Jackie could talk about this better than anyone, because she spent many years in the corporate culture of the Tribune, and she knows how class biased it was. And I'm sure Jack Matthews, who was the film editor at the LA Times when Michael was there, told me the same thing, that Michael had the same difficulties with the horrible class bias that editors, the sense of Michael somehow being socially beneath the very people he was working with and working for, and that stunted so much of his professional growth. And he was, as Leonard Maltin talked about, he was never really accorded the proper professional respect by his colleagues and editors that his talent and his work ethic deserved. So in many ways, for me, having spent some time at the Tribune as a freelancer, it was amazing to me that Michael lasted there as long as he did, because from the editors of the film section, who quite frankly were basically suburban housewives, not literally, but in their taste and in their aesthetic, that's what they were. And I can only imagine how difficult and frustrating in many ways that daily experience was for him, somebody who loved classic cinema, tourist cinema, but especially foreign cinema, to try and get his voice heard and to have the paper take seriously not just the Hollywood films, but to take seriously the kind of coverage that he wanted, I'm sure was a daily battle. And he fought that battle for 15 years. And I can't help but think that's part of that contributed to some of his emotional and physical suffering, because to have to deal with that day in and day out, one can only imagine. But I'd rather focus on the positive side. Michael was a great guy, and for all of the difficulties he endured in his life growing up with a single mother, and he allowed his talent to flourish, and he did what he had to do to survive. But and I think the thing about Michael that stands out to me is that once he did get into a position of authority, into a position of power, when he became the lead film critic at the Tribune in September of 1993, he didn't wield that power baroquely or negligently. He was, as Chaz indicated earlier, he was very democratic and egalitarian in terms of helping out other people, myself included. The story I tell the story in the Tribute, but when he first arrived here, there was a notorious kind of paranoid man, Frank Casey, who ran the Warner Brothers film office in Chicago, and for wholly idiotic and paranoid reasons, he had been banning Jonathan Rosenbaum from screenings. And when Michael got here, when Michael found that out, one of the first things Michael did was to use his clout as the new Tribune film critic to get Casey to unban Jonathan. And Casey finally relented, in part because I don't think he wanted to antagonize Michael or the Tribune. And that's just one example of Michael, showing a great camaraderie and kinship with friends and also with other critics. So I also had the great pleasure of 3 times, 96, 97, and 99. We stayed together at Cannes. And I had the fortune of going to Cannes for the first time in 95. And my friend Vijay Ganesh, who is here, he fortunately had been to the festival 6 or 7 times, and he could kind of guide me. So the following year in 1996, when Michael came for the first time, I was now in a position to kind of help Michael with the ropes. And Jackie spoke earlier of how Michael lived in the moment, and this extended even to his European travels. I believed in 1996, this was the first time he had ever been overseas. It was the first time, to my knowledge, he'd ever had a passport, because he told me that he had got an expedited passport 24 hours before his flight. He shows up in Cannes. He had no hotel. He had, and fortunately, I had found a place on my own, and then it turned out they were able to, extend it for the 2 of us. And so that's and it was, look, in retrospect, it was somewhat miraculous, but it worked out. And again, sort of echoing some of the things that Chaz spoke about. Michael was the kid in the candy store, the famous Wells line about, Hollywood being the greatest train set a 12-year-old boy could ever have. And that was Michael at Cannes, because it was movies all day, but it was the glamour, it was the excitement. And if you've ever had the pleasure of going to Cannes, the Lumiere Theater is the greatest theater in the world to see a film because of its incredible architecture, acoustics, the size of the image. So for Michael took great pleasure actually in most of the time in not going to the 8:30 press screening, but waiting to see the film at night and to dressing up and to putting on the black tie, because he loved that ambiance. He loved that sense of being there with a crowd. He wanted to see the films with the audiences and not necessarily with the industry and critics. But and the other favorite story of mine from that period was that first year, Michael showed up at Cannes without a computer. And I fortunately had my laptop with me. And at that time, I had because of my freelance sports and arts connection to the Tribune, I had a way of dialing directly into the Tribune system. So we did have a way of filing. But so fortunately, my laptop, funny enough, I had used it so much that the letters on the keyboard, some of them had started to fray and you couldn't see the letters. And Michael would look down at the letters and said, "I can't see the letters." And I said, "Well, Michael, don't you know which keys are which letters? That's pretty obvious." And he said, "No, I don't." And so I would sometimes have to sit at the computer and he would literally transcribe to me and I would write on the computer, because he didn't know the keys well enough because some of the keys on my computer, were unreadable. So that was one of my favorite stories. And I remember Rick Cogan was the Sunday editor one time, and we were going back and forth with him, and it was kind of a little hectic, but kind of classic, sort of pre-internet kind of how one used to file back then. So it was, but those were great times, great memories. I felt, and Michael Phillips is a very dear friend of mine as well. And, he kind of got caught in the middle again with the top editors, but it was an absolute, it was beyond the pale how the Tribune editors treated him at the end. I will have eternal damnation for those people. And I will have eternal damnation that these people who worked with Michael for 15, 16 years, and not a single one of them came to express their condolences at Michael's mother's, either her wake or her funeral. Jeff Brown was the only editor who came, and anyone who knows Jeff Brown was a mensch. But the rest of the editors, I have utter contempt for personally and professionally. They were cowards. in how they dealt with Michael, and it's to their eternal shame how they treated him. And so I feel badly that things ended for Michael the way that they did. But the great thing is that he did have that 14, 15-year run. His work is viewable, it's accessible, and and the combativeness, the style, but also just the love and passion of cinema. I think that's the thing that all cinema. I remember the one year Michael came to Sundance, which I believe was 99. And it was for him not as enjoyable of an experience, because I remember him saying to me even that he felt that the rise of the American independent film movement and Sundance had eclipsed and marginalized foreign language cinema and in the States. And for him, that was a galling idea that so much attention was being paid to young and first-time filmmakers at the expense of the European masters. So, but Michael was a character in the best sense of the word. There was no one like him. I miss him. I wish I had been able to see him more the last 10 years of his life. Through my friends Jerry Perry and Patrick McGilligan and some of the other Madison crowd, they would give me updates about him, and I'm glad. I appreciate them doing what they did, but I miss him. I think cinema misses him, and criticism misses him. He was a good guy, and he had a huge heart, and he helped me. He was a mentor. He helped me deal with those same Tribune editors who were so obstinate and difficult to deal with, and so I miss him. And I remember those times in Cannes. That's how I prefer to remember him, because those were Michael when he was at his best, and I think that's when he was probably the happiest, at least in the years that I knew him, probably the happiest he was. So I appreciate everyone allowing me again to remember Michael, and he's been on my mind a lot, and I think he's thank you, Jackie, for all the love you gave him, and thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. That was very heartfelt. And I remember a couple times that I went to Cannes, I remember being with you and that kind of frantic looking around for to get a connection and file copy, and then just all the craziness of the festivals. It was some of my fondest memories. So thank you very much for that tribute. Okay, so there are a few people that sent comments and they were unable to attend, so I will read their comments. The first one is from film critic Pete Rayner. You may know him. If not, he's an excellent writer. Michael was a vital voice in film criticism for over 4 decades. No one was more passionate in championing the films he loved. With all his infirmities late in life, he still regularly attended screenings and voting meetings. I always found this tremendously moving. Rest in peace. I will read another tribute from another film critic named Bob Kohler. Bob wasn't able to make it today, but he knew Michael pretty well as well. And so I'll just read this from him. Again, it's a film critic named Bob Kohler. Michael was a close colleague of mine at the LA Times in the 90s. I got to know him on an unusual level. We worked in the calendar section late at night, and we would often leave together, me driving back home and dropping him off at his place en route. This gave us long stretches to talk about movies, books, and ideas. Lots and lots of hours on Angelopoulos, Kubrick, Kiarostami, Ackerman. He was unusual among most Los Angeles critics for being adventurous in his movie viewing. His cinephilia was the real deal, much more than surface deep. He had little time for Hollywood, even though the thing is unavoidable as a Los Angeles Times film writer, and even though he lived in the part of the city we call Hollywood, the real Hollywood, the working class Hollywood. As a younger critic, I was pinching myself to realize that I was just hanging out with him and shooting the breeze, since I had long admired Michael's unusually astute and thoughtful criticism. His value to younger Los Angeles-based critics was key in our development. He wasn't so much older that he could be considered a mentor or elder, yet he was older enough to feel like he could be an encouraging veteran. He was an extremely serious guy, and he tended to bring out my own serious side, which always surprised me. I felt the instinct to push things with him into a funnier, more humorous vein. That's just my nature interacting with others. But it never quite worked with Michael. That was okay. I completely accepted that with him because I always came away from time with Michael feeling a bit richer. He was a rare guy, and just the thought that he's gone is hard to accept. Now we have our memories, and those are good enough. And then one more, I have a contribution from Rob Elder. He was here earlier. He's, as he mentioned, on the road. And Rob was a colleague of ours at the Tribune. He's a journalist, author. I think he's written 16 books. And this is what he sent to me. Michael was a man of passionate opinions and lively debates, of which we had many when I was a junior critic at the Chicago Tribune. My most endearing memory of him was when he came to the Gene Siskel Film Center for my first book signing party, during which the diamond popped out of my fiancée Betsy's engagement ring. Michael searched for the diamond valiantly, at one point crawling on his hands and knees under the signing table. Michael scoured the venue with us, fretting like he'd lost something valuable of his own. We never found the diamond, but I always loved his never give up attitude and his kindness in helping us. And our last scheduled speaker is Michael Dare. Michael is a writer, editor, and producer, and a former colleague of Michael's at the LA Weekly.
Hello, am I
Hi.
on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, okay. First of all, Michael Wilmington was my editor at the LA Weekly, and I've always said that's the toughest job on earth. And I got to explain this a little bit because it really was a unique relationship. And so I got to take you back to 1979 when the first issue of the LA Weekly came out. And I read it and it was okay. And but they said, obviously it didn't have a letter section. They said, please write us letters so we can have a letter section. And then next week I picked up issue 2 of the LA Weekly and they printed all these letters without mine. So I'm like, screw the LA Weekly. And I got on with my life. And then the phone rings. And it's Michael Ventura, the film critic for the LA Weekly, who says, look, I wrote a movie. It's coming out in a couple of weeks. I can't review it. We don't have any other critics here. I went through every letter we got. Yours is the only one I liked. And I'm like, well, then why didn't you print it? Like, well, that wasn't my decision, he says, but still, I'd like to offer you $5 just to review my movie. And give me 200 words on it and we'll print it. And it would be just a personal favor. I need someone to review this movie. And I'm like, nowhere, anywhere in my entire life had the concept of being a journalist even entered my head. I was into other things, but $5 and I got passes to the Black Stallion too. So I went to this movie. It was called Roadie, starring Meatloaf, and I did not like it. I also did not give a shit about journalism. This was like, okay. So I just made a decision to tell the truth. And I handed in this negative review of a movie written by the guy who hired me to write the review and said bye-bye and kind of went and hid. And he published it and then called me back the next week and said, you know, I admire that you had the guts to do that. You want to see another one? It'll be another $5. And I said, yes. And I ended up in every issue of the LA Weekly for the next 10 years. And when he left the paper, I was offered to be the film critic for the paper. I could move up the corporate ladder. And I was like, do I want to get all these invitations and then give the assignments to all the editors and then collect them and then edit them and hand them into the entertainment editor? No, I just want to go see movies. And I turned down the gig, but I was told, this gig is always yours. If you want it, you are next in line for it. And I was like, okay, I appreciate that. But basically my life at the Weekly was this endless succession of editors who only had their gig because I turned it down. So one day Michael Wilmington shows up. He's like my 4th or 5th editor, and I don't have any idea who he is, but I just know that I'm going to have to put him through your standard training period of how to be my editor. And he didn't know LA. He didn't know me. And I just had to explain to him that, you know, and he hadn't been an editor before. He was just a writer. So I said, you just have to understand that what I hand in might not bear any relation to the assignment. I may hand in a review that's a jigsaw puzzle or a crossword puzzle or I handed in a review that was a flowchart. That got printed. I said, so just be aware that I'm not fucking with you, but I fuck with the audience. And he said, okay. And this was his first day there. And it was like, he'd never been to LA. We had a screening that night. And he said, I'm not sure how I'm going to get there or where this is. And I went, well, I'll take you. Well, let's hang out. So I drove him to that screening, and this became our routine. I mean, the whole time he was at the LA, he didn't know Los Angeles. I had a convertible Mustang. It was like every time we went to a screening, wherever it was, I'd take Mulholland home and we would just cruise around and I would show him the city and we became actual friends. I mean, I have to show you, one of the pictures I have of Michael is this one. And what is so cool about this is that that's my sofa. That's my cat. I do not have any other pictures of any of my editors in my home, right? That just Michael Ventura. No, he never, we weren't that kind of friend. But Michael, oh yeah, I was his best friend in LA for a while. We went to everything. We went to screenings together. We were great pals. He started even, okay, he was much more serious about being a film critic than I was. So he becomes a member of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. And he asks me, would I like to become a member? And I said, why would I want that? And he says, well, among other things, you'll definitely get passes from all the studios. You know, which was something I struggled with because they didn't like me. So I went, okay, he says, submit. Okay, here's what you do. Pick 5 of your best pieces, make 30 copies of them, submit them. So I'm a comedy writer. My best pieces are my funniest pieces. My best review is of I remember saying there's absolutely nothing arty about Choke Canyon. Otherwise, it would have been called Artichoke Canyon. That's how serious a film critic I was. So I hand in all my best material, all my funniest material. They turn me down. Michael comes back to me and says, no. They don't think you're serious about being a film critic. I went, I'm not. Well, still, you've written serious stuff. Gather 5 pieces that aren't funny. I'm like, you mean give them my worst material? And he said, yeah. So I picked my 5 worst reviews, not a single joke in any of them. And that gets me into LACMA. And I am so grateful to Michael for getting me in there. I mean, just immediately, we vote in Leonard Maltin. And Leonard, oh, it was so good to see you again. I did not know when we voted you in as president that meant you had to welcome all of us into your living room for the next year. But boy, did it justify my joining that organization, just so that 12 times I got to go and hang out in your living room for hours. Oh, that was so much fun. It taught me so much. I learned so much from Leonard Maltin, from just seeing a nice house. I'm making $5 a review. I'm looking, oh my God, film criticism. It's like this, it can actually lead to a living. It was mind-boggling. Leonard, so good to see you again. Oh my God. So there was that. And then we had a series of screenings. They said, every member of the group, pick a movie and find the filmmaker, and we're going to have a bunch of screenings where you show the movie, and then afterwards you talk to it with the filmmaker. So of course, Michael Wilmington picks, Oliver Stone, and he does Born on the 4th of July, and others are going, oh my God, Martin Scorsese, The Lesson Passion of Christ. And I'm like, there's a movie I really want to see on a big screen, and I don't know if it's okay, but I really want to see Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. Is it okay if I do that? And they were like, Critics' Choice is what it's called. You go ahead. And I got to realize an incredible dream. I called Russ Meyer, and he said, you want to show my 35 millimeter print? I said, sure. And he gives me his phone book. And I call Roger Ebert. I have absolutely no idea if he thinks this movie is an aberration or if he's proud of it, but he says, oh my God, you're going to have a screening and Russ is going to be there? I'll be there. I'll pay for the whole trip. I'll bring Chaz with me. Hi, Chaz. That's where we met. Then I got the entire living actors, the entire cast. This was the most popular screening we ever had. 200 people were turned away at the door. It was taped by Criterion to be on a laser disc. And all that, and I blame all this, of course, on Michael Wilmington. I mean, it would have never occurred to me in a million years to join this organization. And just this one project, 20th Century Fox refused to release it to Fox, to Criterion. And Roger Ebert and I spent 30 years trying to make this happen because Criterion lost the footage. And we were on the phone and we finally found all the footage. And just last year, this came out. 30 years after we started this project, Criterion finally released Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And this is, once again, somewhere back in his history, this wouldn't have happened if not for Michael Wilmington. And unfortunately, both Russ Meyer and Roger Ebert died before this came out. But if you got a project that's taking a long time, 30 years, yeah, beat that. Okay, I got a list here. Then he's offered this job at the LA Times. He'd been my editor and friend for more than a year. And suddenly he's faced with the exact same problem that I had, which was moving up the ladder. He knew I deliberately refused to move up the ladder. I did not want to be up there. And he's offered a gig at the LA Times, which is obviously a step up from people who might not consider the LA Weekly to be, the most important thing on his resume. By the way, I have no idea what he did before the LA Weekly. Someone could clue me in. He just showed up out of the blue as far as I was concerned. But we talked every day about this. It was the toughest decision he ever had to make. And I felt so much for him because he was moving. He had to consider being the big fish in this little pond to a little fish in that really big pond. And they were promising him certain things, but not the editorship. He wouldn't have been in charge like it was at the LA Weekly. And he wasn't with these insane cool people who were constantly coming in and out of the LA Weekly office. That was a fun place to work. And we went through, this was just a discussion that went on and on and on. And finally he made the decision and went to the Times. And he had the job for like 2 weeks and he calls me back and says, oh boy, did I make a bad decision. And Weekly had already hired someone else, so he couldn't come back. But yeah, he hated it there. He had a million complaints. And I was like, well, I won't say I told you so, but oh, and I have to point out one other thing. We shared assignments. I'd never done this with an editor before. Since we went everywhere together, we all went to the same screenings. We both saw Edward Scissorhands. And then the studio offered us. Michael says to me, let's do it together. You ever done an interview together? I went, no, but I want to meet him. Sure, I want to meet him. So we interviewed Tim Burton together, and he had a tape recorder going and I had a tape recorder going. And we taped the interview, and afterwards it's like, you transcribe your tape, I'll transcribe my tape. We'll get together tomorrow and compare our transcriptions and figure out what the piece is going to be. And the next day, the most monumental thing happened. We got together and our transcriptions were completely different. It made no sense. Wait a minute. We were both there. We both had tapes. How could these be so different? And what it was, the main difference was that Tim Burton did not speak in complete sentences. People rarely speak in complete sentences, but Tim Burton particularly did not speak in complete sentences. And so he would make mistakes. He would say something like, I did something last Wednesday, no Thursday, and blah, 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 blah. And Michael Wilmington would leave that in. He would leave in Wednesday, no Thursday. And I'm like, wait a minute. He corrected himself. Why are you changing his correction? Leave in it. That's, I left it out because he corrected himself. And he said, no, I have no obligation to correct it the way he said. If I want to do it this way, I want to show the way he really talks. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's hard to read. And he comes off like a jerk. It's like, oh, so you're trying to make him look good, huh? We have the most epic discussion of the nature of journalism and what our obligations were to our audience versus the person we were profiling, because it became really true that I was accidentally making him look good and he was accidentally making him look like, like illiterate, incomprehensible, idiot. And with the same interview, this was the greatest discussion I think I may have had in my entire life. It went on and on and on. And what made it so great was there was no animus. It was all love. I wasn't trying to change his mind. He wasn't trying to change my mind. We were just trying to figure out, what are we doing here? Why did you do that? Why did you re-edit him? And this is what he really said. No, I'm transcribed what he meant. You transcribed what he said. Which one do people want to read? It went on and on. I learned so much. He was so smart. He was so funny. He was the best boss I've ever had. If you can consider him a boss.
Mr. Dare.
Yes,
Hi.
yes.
Dan Geyer from Chicago. We haven't met before. You clearly are a person who has an extended history with Mr. Wilmington, who is a delightful person. Could I ask a question for you? Could you briefly summarize what you think Mr. Wilmington's legacy is for the rest of us?
Oh, okay. Well, that's tough because I really only know how he affected me. He was at the LA Weekly for a year or so. And then after he left the Times, he disappeared from my life. I mean, I'm learning what he did the past few decades. We completely lost touch the instant he left Los Angeles, and I didn't read it. I mean, I read a few of his things, but I wasn't following him. So the legacy for me is just so completely personal. I went into this profession as a joke. My only desire was to make people laugh, and I didn't care if I was being truthful about the movie, as long as I made people laugh. And he was the exact opposite.
He made people laugh, though. He did make people laugh.
Oh, he did.
Okay, so now we're going to have. Thank you very much. That was wonderful and very entertaining. We haven't met before, so it's fun to put your face to your name. And I thank you very much for contributing. That was very, very fun and lively. So could we have Joe McBride, Jerry Perry, and Ken Mate speak a little bit about their experience with Michael and put the Madison film scene in context for people who don't know it?
Well, hi, I'm Joe McBride. I've known Mike since the 60s. When I came to Madison, Mike taught me a lot about films and especially about acting. Most of what I know about acting, I learned from Mike. And I want to stress, not everybody knows who knew him later that he was a great actor. In Madison. In the background here, I have a still from a film that I directed with Mike called Close But No Cigar, which took us 6 months to shoot because we were having trouble with one of the other actors. It all takes place in about a 20-minute period, but just went on and on. It started snowing at one point, even though it takes place in the summer. But Mike was very professional. I directed him twice in the Zoo Story. He was electrifying. Anybody who saw the performance, he was just amazing with two different actors. Mike, of course, played Jerry. And he was so good that in the death scene, I actually thought twice that he had actually died. We used a real knife. I don't know why we did this, but I was really scared. and I was relieved when he took a bow. But he was just great, and I feel a little guilty because I got him sidetracked onto writing more and more. I mean, he was a very good reviewer, but I said, let's do a book on John Ford together because I thought Ford was such a big subject. I needed a collaborator, and this was part of Mike's legacy. This is the original edition of our John Ford critical study published by the Cinema 2 series in England, the British Film Institute. This is the original cover that Martin Scorsese liked, not the American cover, which replaced it with the black and white photo of Ford, but this is the end of the Searchers. And Mike was he's a great writer and a tremendous analyst of films. We spent endless hours discussing Ford films. And in those days, before DVDs and cassettes, we had to take buses to Chicago to see films at the Clark Theater in the Loop, where they showed classic films. We saw The Searchers there. Jerry Perry kept saying, you guys got to see The Searchers. I saw that when I was a kid. This is a great movie. And so Mike and I wrote an essay on that helped revive interest in the film. And but it was a difficult collaboration. It was a struggle. I'm not going to mince words, but we got along fine. But there were some battles along the way, literally. I remember one time we had a fist fight in the Memorial Union over Mike's refusal to return my copy of the novelization of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. That may seem trivial, but things were very passionate in those days. And there was the Wisconsin Union Film Committee. I'll never forget this. We used to have these ferocious debates about what films to show in 35 millimeter on the campus. And there was the John Ford, John Wayne contingent, I guess you could call it. Then there was the Jean-Luc Godard Maoist contingent. This is oversimplifying. And Mike one time wanted us to show El Dorado, the great Howard Hawks film with John Wayne. And of course, this was anathema to half of the committee. But Mike gave a 15-minute speech about this film, and he was so passionate. I mean, he's such a great actor that he was weeping at the end of it. Tears were just flowing, and all the Maoists on the committee were so stunned that they said, "Oh, okay, we'll bring this John Wayne movie to the campus." Sure, okay, Mike, great, But it was just great to be with him, and we had big arguments. We didn't always agree, but it was very creative, and I wish he had continued acting more. The costume I put together, if you could see in the background, he wore that black jacket and the white pants and the white shirt. I put that together for the film because to make a color film look good in those days, all I could do to control it was to make the costumes black and white, which made all the other colors stand out. And Mike wore that same outfit for, I don't know, 30, 40 years, I guess, but it became his trademark. But he was a very intense actor. He was always dedicated and professional, and I think he's a wonderful guy. He told me so many stories. I really enjoyed his mother, Edna. I got to know her well, and when people were a little mean to her sometimes, but if you took the time to talk to her, she was fascinating. She knew a lot about science. We talked a lot about science, and she saw Orson Welles when he was a teenager play Svengali and Trilby in Chicago. I mean, this woman had a great life, and Mike was a very devoted son. But there's a story he told me that maybe is symbolic. This is the earliest Mike Wilmington story. That when he was born, storm in Williams Bay, Wisconsin, way out in the boondocks, and there was no doctor, and she was waiting for a midwife who was having trouble getting there because of the blizzard. Mike was trying to come out, and Edna was holding Mike in. He was struggling to get out, and she was holding him in for 20 minutes, according to Mike. And finally, when he came out, his head was shaped like an ice cream cone with a point, he told me. And as babies do, it gradually resolved into a oval type shape. But Mike was, maybe that's some Freudian biographer could make something out of it. Mike struggled to emerge into the world, but he was a one of a kind guy, and he was a great influence on a lot of us. And I'll miss him an awful lot. I'm glad I got to know him again back in Los Angeles, and he was a really sweet fellow, and he was still the same guy, a little more mellow, but he was still a feisty guy. And we had some strong arguments, as people have said. He's very obstinate. if you liked Howard Hawks' Real Lobo, which we went to Milwaukee to see, he loved everything about Real Lobo, even the bad actors in the film. He would defend the bad actors. He had a thing where he would not admit that somebody could be miscast in a film. If somebody was in a film, they were the perfect actor for that film, and he would rationalize why Jennifer O'Neill was just fine in Real Lobo, you know. But I mean, he could really make you understand the nuances and complexities of human nature, and he was so well read and so lively in intellect that he influenced me a great deal, and I owe him a great deal. And so thank you, Michael. Thank you for everybody for coming too. I really appreciate seeing all of you.
Thank you, Joe. That was wonderful to hear. Jerry or Ken, did you want to chime in?
Okay, I'll come in, I guess. Can you hear me? I'm in an echoey room. Am I echoing? Am I okay? All right. Anyway, just a little echoing. So I think, yeah, it's important to mention Madison. And there, if I look around in the Zoom, I see lots of faces of ex-Madisonians, from Glenn Silver to Russell Campbell, who is all the way from New Zealand, the editor of Velvet Light Trap, to Peter Neufeld somewhere else, and Goldie Eder. So yeah, to contextualize Michael is to see him as a product of Madison. He was came from a small town in Wisconsin, came to Madison. And first he was a theater guy, and then he was a movie guy. So I knew him first vaguely as a theater person, because I also was a theater director. And my first meeting with Michael was not a very good one, which I think is not atypical. I think it's typical of many people who have had some terrible times with Michael, but over the years got to love him. And that's certainly my case. So I was directing Peter Pan. I was looking for someone to play Captain Hook, and I'd seen Michael twice in incredible theater productions. Intense is the word Joe used. He's the most intense method actor, but a brilliant actor. And I approached him on the street. I said, "Excuse me, I'm directing Peter Pan. Would you like to play Captain Hook in my production?" And Michael did not know me. He looked me up and down. He had, "Who the hell is this person stopping me on the street?" And he just said, "No," and walked away. That was my first meeting with Michael. So then we jump ahead several years into the film community. And I think what Joe described is correct. There were so many passionate people loving cinema, but also divided all kinds of crazy ways and hating anybody who didn't have your opinion. And so Michael and I often fought, because I think I was more on the leftist side, and Michael was among the aesthetes. And we had a pretty bad aesthetic relationship. It was a terrible time. And one time, and so Joe McBride had a fist fight with Michael. I had an incident where, after I'd been particularly snotty to Michael, he leapt on me in the student union and wrestled me to the ground. And luckily my girlfriend at the time was there and pulled him off. It was 2 against 1. And so I guess I won that fight, although Joe thinks that he was witness to Edna, Michael's very loyal mother, throwing a cup of coffee on me in defense of her son. So that was kind of seriously a typical time with Michael, not strange at all. And yeah, so I don't know if Kenny wants to jump in with his Michael memories, because that's it. And let me say at the end, the last 3 times I saw Michael in my life, he was a pussycat. He was so sweet and so glad to see me, and the nicest guy on earth. So when I tell these kind of smirky stories from years ago, I say this with true love in my heart for the late Michael. Kenny, take over.
Yeah, well, just fine. And actually, we ought to hear from people like Debbie Weiner, who I noticed is on the call, and other people who are involved in movies then as well. I'll just tell one anecdote. regarding Michael, which was that sometime in that period, Jean-Luc Godard was going to the University of Michigan to show film or a film, maybe Tout va bien or some film. And I, with a few of the other more politically minded film people, and I wasn't really a film person, but I had a good friend who was a projectionist. And I used to hang out with him and smoke dope in the projection booth. And that's how I got into movies. And so we were going up to interview Godard, and a few people piled into the car. Maureen Turam was one of them. Russell, I think, was one of them. Campbell, Louis Alvarez was one of them. And Michael showed up, and I barred him from the car. He wasn't politically correct enough to go interview Godard. He had taken the wrong side too many times. Notwithstanding that, a few months later, or maybe a year later, we published an underground newspaper called Takeover, and somehow I saw Michael, or our paths cross. You know, everybody in Madison's paths cross 4 or 5 times a day. And I said, you want to do movies, review movies for us? Maybe I didn't even say it. Maybe he just came over and handed in movie reviews. I don't remember. But he became the Takeover movie reviewer, notwithstanding the fact that he had been barred from the car. And of course, you know, he always turned his copy in on time, unlike other people at the paper. So he got a nice full page to do his movie reviews. That's one of the places where he cut his teeth, but he had plenty of places to cut his teeth in Madison because he was a talented guy and people appreciated what he did.
Thanks, Ken. I will add to that. You know, Michael was not good at staying in touch with people. He just wouldn't, for whatever reason, however he was hardwired, he just would never sort of think of having lunch or getting together just to chat. So he was not good at staying in touch with people, but it's been very touching because when he did bump into people or meet people in some way, it was like no time had gone by and everyone just picked up where they left off and had, you know, enjoyed his friendship yet again. So I wanted to make sure that we get Mike Riano to speak because Mike is going to share about his documentary that he's making, and then we can open it up to other. I know a lot of people want to say something, but I do just want to make sure Mike gets his time to talk about his film.
So I met Michael 1974 at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And at that time, a long friendship was immediately forged because of our mutual love of film. To be honest, it kind of intimidated me. I was applying to be on I just moved to Madison in 1974 from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and I was going to be on the Union Film Committee. And right away he said, "Do you think Kubrick is a fascist director?" And I'm like, whoa. So I didn't know what to think of the guy, but he was immediately nice to me and we connected. I reconnected with Michael a couple of times over the years, but like Jackie was saying, kind of lost touch. But then in 1992, when he became the lead film critic for the Chicago Tribune, I was seeing him because I was in Chicago working with the guys at Synapse off and on, Bud Young and Dwight Irwin. So I didn't have the idea for the film until 1998 when I moved to Chicago for 2 years. And I saw him teaching his 3-hour film classes without notes. And I was mesmerized by what I call his Michael Wilmington character and his storytelling about it. I realized it was like he was on stage performing for an audience. After I completed my own documentary about men and their fathers called Father, Son, and Work Tapes in 2000, Mike, after watching it, said he wished I had interviewed him. And I was kind of taken aback. I didn't know much about Michael and his father. Later on, I would find out there was not much relationship there. But at that time, I realized he would be a great collaborator to do this film together, and he would be more than just an interviewee subject, and that's what he turned out to be. So as a result of his response, myself and my co-director and filmmaking partner, Bud Young of Synapse Films, we just started filming his classes, which were like performance, and his activities at the Chicago Tribune as well as other locations around Chicago. I was already living in the Twin Cities, and when I got a Minnesota State Arts Board grant in 2004 for just a little bit of money, like $6,000, that was enough money to kind of get started. We got Michael and other Chicago film people, including Studs Terkel, Jonathan Rosenbaum, and the late Milo Stalik of Facets Film, and Dan Geyer, many others, to sit down. But originally the film was going to be called, it was going to be about the day of a life of what I like to call the hardest working film reviewer critic I know in the business. The original title was 24 by 24, 24 frames per second, 24 hours a day. And as his friend and colleague Dan Geyer once said on camera, Michael Wilmington's life is the movies. He has no other life, which is only true part of the time, of course. And we also witnessed his love and devotion taking care of his mother, Edna, who became part of the story too. We did this filming off and on from 2000 to 2013, and the filming had many stops and starts. Like I said, after I moved back to the Twin Cities in 2000 for a teaching job. And Bud and I also added Mindy Duvernay as a producer and story editor in 2019 to help us keep this longstanding project on track. There were many highlights and some low moments as well. But one of the highlights, final highlights, was before Michael moved back to Los Angeles. We watched Mike create his film reviewer alter ego called Mick Wolverton in a short film that Michael wrote and acted in called Night of the Shrieking Dead. And he just excelled as a writer and actor. And this was like right after he left the Tribune and was no longer writing was full-time writing of film reviews. And it was at this time Dwight Irwin also joined our team as an additional camera person, as he was director of photography for what will become the film within a film. And if anybody's interested in seeing that film, we can provide Vimeo links. So at this time, with over 80 hours of footage from this 13-year period, and now with the loss of our collaborator, inspiration, and dear friend Michael, we have the task of putting together a portrait of someone who had a great impact on my life as a filmmaker. So our goal now is to raise the money and finish the film in late 2022, early 2023. We're applying for a fiscal sponsorship to Film North here in the Twin Cities. So if anybody's interested in helping with this effort, please leave either your email in the chat room, or you can email me. I left that in there. And if you're on Facebook, we have a Michael Wilmington film critic page set up, and we'll be having details on also our website that Bud provided earlier. So we hope that you will stay in touch with us in the months ahead. And Michael is one of those people, as others have said, once you met him, you either clicked with him and you were just kind of almost attached to him in certain ways, or you just didn't get him. But working on this film, just so many wonderful moments. And sometimes I would just say to him, okay, give us your Brando. And he would do Brando. We've got scenes of him doing Brando on the waterfront. Or we'd say, hey, can you do Brando's thing at the end of Apocalypse Now? He would do that. The only thing he turned down was I had a crazy idea to have him tattooed on his arm, either cinema or film. And he would not do that. But he really was just devoted to helping us with this project. And he got us into Chicago Filmmakers, Chicago Film Festival, wonderful interview with Liv Ullmann. I mean, there's so many things. His stuff with Studs Terkel is just amazing. And with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Archive, there's going to be incredible things that we're hoping to pull together. And in the future, with Jackie's permission, I'm hoping we can even try to figure out some kind of podcast, as I've, along with the research crew, has just discovered he did so many tape recordings of his interview that were researched for Chicago Tribune articles. It's just amazing. It'll make a wonderful podcast down the line. So thanks everybody for participating. This has been a wonderful
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And you make a great point that I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but Michael taught for years and years at the University of Chicago Graham School and USC and UCLA. And as Mike mentioned, he never used notes. And I think that was his way of being a performer, because he would just get up and talk, at length and very insightfully about the films we were going to see. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Mike. And I know how hard you've been working on the film. And of course, you're instrumental in helping us clear out the storage and getting that archive material to UW Madison. So thank you.
Michael, thank you for making this film. And I really, really hope, and I'm sure we all do, that you finish it and get it out there, because I heard you have 80 hours of Michael talking. So it's bringing back Michael as an actor and critic, you know, the two halves of Michael come together. I was so proud of him that he got that great job at the Tribune, and he really just flowered. So I think that the film would be a lasting, immortal tribute to Mike, and let's all hope and let's all contribute.
Thank you, Joseph. So, and thank you, Jackie, for everything you've done and for all your care and attention. And I'm sorry Paul couldn't join us, but to helping him once he had Parkinson's, and to watch that gift, you know, be shut down. It teared me up many times.
It's a terrible disease. It is.
I couldn't talk to him.
It is. So I want to move on to some other participants.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I've just recently been in touch with Michael's cousins, as I mentioned, on his mom's side, the O'Keefe family. And John O'Keefe Kavanaugh had messaged me that he wanted to speak. So John.
Right. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thanks so much. I met Michael when I was 17. When I was 13, he was 18. I visited in Wisconsin for a week and spent a day with him. It was really a delightful day. But for most of my life, you know, I had this cousin out there who was it was kind of like a comet. He would sort of fly by. We'd hear, you know, now he's in Chicago writing for the Tribune, and now he's gone to LA, and now he's writing for the LA Times. But you know, from my perspective, he was 13, and then he was 75 and he died. It just sort of flew by. But I would like, Mike, I think it might be worthwhile if I'll be as fast as I can, but just a little bit about his background.
Sure.
Edna was the second of three kids. Edna's older brother was Assistant Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin. Edna's little sister, my mother, Martha, met an astronomer at the Yerkes Observatory, which is half a mile from where Michael lived for years, in Williams Bay. That's my mom. My mother and Edna, they were not the best of friends. So although Michael did have 9 cousins, that's my brothers and sisters, who were aware of him and really curious about him, from our perspective, he was, there was a relationship between us. My mom and his mom were not best friends, but his father, we knew that he had a father, but from our perspective, it appeared that Grandpa, his mother's father, was the father figure in his life, and I think it's worthwhile just knowing about Axel Tulane, that's Michael's grandfather, his mother's father, that he was a carpenter. He built houses. He built them alone. He would bring somebody in when he was doing the roof beam, but other than the roof beam, he would do the whole house. He was a carpenter and he was really good, but his grandfather was the king of Sweden, and it was just not important to him. You know, king, carpenter, what's the difference? You just, you live your life. I think that I was listening to these stories about this guy who didn't seem to care too much about class distinctions. That is a part of his family background. When Edna visited in Washington for a period of time, and when she was in where her little sister Martha lived, and they didn't get in touch. Edna was I think I don't know how many, but she carved at least one of the gargoyles on the National Cathedral. Maybe several, and I'm not sure who she had in mind when she carved them. But we didn't get in touch. Michael for us was a distant figure. When I was there, when I was 13, and he drove me around, he spent a day with his pesky little cousin from who knows where and why. He drove around southern Wisconsin, and he explained why roads were bent. There was a road that when they were first putting it in was shining lights right at the Yerkes Observatory, and observatory persuaded them to bend the road, and he explained that to me. I just really do want to say, for the family, there are four of us here on this. That's Emily, the one who's out in Kilimanjaro, and Jane, who's in Virginia, Lucy, who's in Ecuador, and me. For us, it's a great relief to see that he lived his life among really wonderful people. Jackie, thanks a lot for putting this together. It's a service to the family as well as to a lot of other people.
Of course, it was my pleasure. And honestly, if the situation had been reversed, my efforts would look very shabby, because Michael would have done far more and a better job. He had infinite patience with me, and he gave me so much pure joy throughout the entire time that I knew him. I feel like this is a minimal gesture. So let's go on to the next speaker. It's someone named Paul K. had messaged me that Paul K. wanted to share.
Paul Kornblue, was a privilege to know Michael and to edit his work back in the Wisconsin days. And I want to just point out how deeply he was influenced by his experience in acting. And he turned in a review for me once. And my comment was, it doesn't seem like you're buying into the lead's performance. Why don't you just criticize it? And his response shows how charitable and kind-hearted, and he pointed out a fact that we all know, but in years in working in the film industry, I've never heard somebody point it out. He said, you have to be careful criticizing an actor because you don't know if it's the director's fault. And I thought that showed so much kind-heartedness. And I would just end, we all remember Michael for writing long. And probably the best thing he ever did for me was the 250-word obit for Charlie Chaplin that I called him up, and he sent over to me in about 20 minutes. And the world is a sadder place without Michael. I'll cherish his memory. We all know that he was brilliant and eccentric and encyclopedic, but he really added to any group of people that he was around. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Paul. I remember that distinction too, his hesitation to criticize an actor because you never were sure if it was the director's influence. I remember him mentioning that to me many times too. Dan,
Jackie, can I just add one comment on?
Yeah, of course.
Because this is, this mystery has been brought up several times today about how, although Michael seemed to be from a different class than his editors who were, snooty, upper middle class arrivistes, somehow he managed to stay on jobs. And my theory is that it has to do with how charitable he was about movies. Hollywood Studios' definition of a good film critic is someone who likes their films. That's a good critic. And strangely, Michael fit in with this definition because he went backwards and forwards to like practically every movie he wrote about, to find nice things about it. And the studios loved that, and actors loved that. And so they supported him in his jobs. The studios who put ads into papers thought Michael was a great critic. So he strangely served two masters. He served Hollywood, and he also served all the real film people who were so thrilled that he wrote so nicely also about little films. But I can say that was one of my many arguments with Michael, was I thought he was too damn easy on movies. I am a tough critic, and we would fight about this. Michael, why do you like everything? Every movie isn't good, and he stood by this belief. And he wasn't a phony. He really liked Almost every movie.
I don't know that he
saw.
liked every single movie. I think that might be
Almost. I said almost.
Oh, almost. Sorry, but you're right. He would bend over backwards to find something that he did like about most movies. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, we had an argument on the Ford book. You may notice there's no chapter on The Grapes of Wrath, which by any standard is one of Ford's greatest films. And Mike didn't like The Grapes of Wrath for whatever reason. I don't know why. And I thought it was great. And we just could never find common ground. So we left it out. And They Were Expendable, it's probably my favorite Ford film right now with Wagon Master. Mike didn't like that, I guess because he thought it was too pro-military or something, but it's a great film. In later years, he said, I was wrong about these two films. So, I mean, he was big enough to admit that. But the chapter on They Were Expendable is an uneasy compromise between our points of view, and it's not satisfactory. But so there were films that he didn't like, but and surprising films too. I mean, who doesn't like The Grapes of Wrath? I mean, but I think that was tourists were down on The Grapes of Wrath for a while because it was a favorite Ford film of non-tourists. I think that's Mike. We were all influenced by Andrew Saris, but anyway, Mike was, he evolved over time, and then that's a sign of a good critic as well.
Dan Dyer,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention to Joseph that one of the Studs Terkel afternoons was Michael and Studs, which we have footage of, talking about Grapes of Wrath. Incredible afternoon. They were unedited. Were you there, Jack? I think it went over 2 hours.
Dan Geyer, did you want to say something? I think.
Yes, I did a testimonial to Mr. Wilmington, including the adventure of where we spent a week looking for the perfect gravesite for his mother, which is a story unto itself, an epic quest. But in regards to making, I'm a journalist, so I'm like all into deadlines. Mine is past. So my name is at the bottom of the screen here, Dan Geyer, and if you want to look me up on Facebook, I just published this morning my brief memory of Mr. Wilmington, and that'll take care of it. And thank you again, Jacqueline and Mike and all you other guys who are really keeping his spirit and his memory and his work alive.
Thanks, Dan. I'll definitely go and read your Facebook comment. And then Bob Storino, you had mentioned that you wanted to tell a story.
My favorite memory of Mike is his first autumn in Chicago. After he started in the Chicago Tribune, early 90s, the time came that year for the annual Chicago Film Festival. This was the first time Mike would be going to that festival since he moved to Chicago from LA. Now, my wife and I had been fans of the Chicago Film Festival and Facets Multimedia for years. I was a regular watching films at the film festival, but since moving to Chicago, I was always distressed. Every year, the general tone of the media, including so many media critics that I really love, but they had a general tone of denigrating the film fest. Right from the advanced news and advertising of it, to its choice of films, its marketing, its organization. It all reminded me of how the Chicago media was always a bit too tough on its sports teams. But then Mike came to Chicago. 92, I heard, okay, so 92, he started at the Tribune. I had lost touch with him. He didn't hear this from me. He didn't know about the annual put downs of the Chicago Film Festival. And when the film was announced, he sensed on his own, I know this because I talked to him later, he sensed something about the coverage of the film festival was wrong. Something wasn't quite right. And in his very first article about the Chicago Film Festival, he emphasized how lucky Chicago was just to have the Chicago Film Festival. And then immediately, I was a news hound, a news junkie. I followed so many news sources. Immediately, all the critics and news sources that had previously denigrated the Chicago Film Festival for years suddenly chimed in, repeating how lucky we are in Chicago just to have our own film festival. And so, this was a character traits of Mike. He was an independent thinker. also to his credit, he was malleable. This is echoing what others have said. After he and I got back in touch in Chicago, we would argue. There were at least two instances where I disagreed with him, once on current events and once regarding his movie reviews. And each time, on these two occasions, he kind of came over to my way of thinking, which, really impressed me at how open-minded he was. And finally, let me add that Mike was also a huge booster of the very important small organization in Chicago called Facets Multimedia. I don't know if that's still there. We don't live in Chicago anymore, but Facets Multimedia and the Chicago Film Festival were two things that Mike constantly boosted and raised the profile of tremendously. And for that, forever grateful to him. That's it.
Thanks, Bob. Let's see, there was someone who's messaging me.
Hi, this is Glenn Silber, who is friends with Mike and a lot of the folks that are here today from Madison. And I just wanted to say very few words. I first met Mike hanging around Takeover, which was probably maybe the early to mid 70s. And it was unique because he was a straight up movie reviewer, unlike most everyone else on the paper that was quite radical. And then shortly after that, he wrote for the Strike newspaper, which was called the Madison Press Connection, which quickly became the best newspaper in Madison while they were fighting a multi-year strike. I did a video for the strike called A Piece of the Press. And Michael's reviews, I thought on balance, were probably the best reason to read the paper. I mean, they were really good and long. He had a lot of space. Another colleague of ours, Bob Lebraska, was a great writer there. And it was really an alternative space in kind of what was trying to be a straight up newspaper while they were fighting and losing the strike. Later on, much later on, so we stayed in touch because I was a filmmaker and he was a film writer, and he would qualify as what the Reader's Digest used to call my most unforgettable character, in the sense that people have already spoken about, that he was really, he was a curmudgeon, but he was more than that. He really knew his shit, and it didn't usually conform to your shit. I mean, it was like he would see a movie and say something nice about it because he really felt it. I don't think he was I wasn't aware he was currying favor with anyone. I just felt he always was able to see something good in the movie and therefore write about that more than people like myself or maybe Jerry Perry, who would be more inclined to be super critical. When he reviewed my first feature documentary, The War at Home, my first feature documentary was on Joe McCarthy. It was more of a descriptive review, which was fine. It was long and complete. The second movie was The War at Home. And that one we felt really had some commercial potential. So I was very much looking forward to Michael's review. I knew he liked it. So like any young filmmaker, I'm reading the review, frantically looking for that priceless quote that's going to help us with our advertising. And so I read the whole review. It's pretty long, but I just can't find that quote. So I talked to Michael. I said, Michael, did you forget something? I mean, didn't you want to give us this is a must-see movie or something like that? I said, oh, it's there. So I read it again. And then I kind of found it. And the quote was, the film has the force of a body blow and the anguish of a scream. I said, that's it? He said, yeah, it's a great quote. I said, okay. So we ran with it. The force of a body blow and the anguish of a scream. I don't know if that would make people want to see the movie. But then we stayed in touch when he moved to LA. And, we didn't spend a lot of time together because I was working in different areas that he was. I continued to work in documentaries and then in network news. But I always felt underneath it all, we were kind of Madison homeboys and we had a bond that we kind of understood. We didn't have to talk a lot. We'd have short conversations and more than how's it going, talk about something that was meaningful to him or that I had seen. And I always respected Michael. I always felt he was definitely part of our little group. And that meant a lot to me, especially once he left Madison. So I miss him. I did come to Chicago Tribune on an assignment for I guess it was ABC News, and I think I met you for about a minute. And it was just great to see him again. And then later on, when I heard he moved back to LA. So thanks for hosting this. And those are just a few memories of how I felt about Michael.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Glenn. I think David Poland wanted to speak.
Hi.
Hey.
I just wanted to say, because I haven't heard it today, and thank you for this, Jackie. This has, been kind of fascinating. Michael, to me, was like one of the most ambitious guys out there amongst the critics group. I finally met Michael really in Chicago, even though I lived in Los Angeles because I got involved with the Ebert show. And, at first my reflection of Michael was what people said about him, which was not always kind amongst the Chicago critics, unfortunately. And they always made fun of Edna and his relationship and all that kind of stuff. And then he was kind of stuck behind Siskel, who was writing terribly, but was still the famous guy from television, even though Michael was the guy who was the critic at the Chicago Tribune. And he really didn't get he always kind of missed getting his full credit for being as great as he was. He was kind of in some ways, like the Larry David of film criticism, in that Larry David for years in New York was known as one of these great writers, but nobody would really hire him for very long. And his shows didn't get picked up and he didn't get lucky, And as I got to know Michael, the conversations about how he didn't learn how to drive in Los Angeles and how he'd been screwed over on the driving lessons. I heard that story at least 300 times.
David, wasn't the story that it was that his driving teacher was being, I don't know, there was some story where he was a character who ended up leaving the country, or there was some crazy story about, but yeah, that's an important thing to add. All the time that he lived in LA, he never learned to drive.
There were a couple lessons that he got, but he was actually promised by the LA Times, I think he was promised by the LA Weekly that he would get driving lessons and learn how to, it never happened. And then his whole relationship with Sheila Benson, rest her soul. That's another, there was always something in the way of Michael, unfortunately. And it was his writing was the thing that kept his audience and kept us all interested in Michael, because all this other, even when, Edna passed away and Jackie was out here and kind of waiting for him to come to LA, he couldn't quite get out of Chicago quickly enough. It was always not quite a thing. And we were very fortunate that he was willing to put his stuff into Movie City News for a number of years, though we couldn't pay him properly or highlight him properly or do the things. We did give him space for the things that he really cared about. And he was always, how many times he pulled me off aside at Toronto or someplace and he'd want to talk. And it was always ended up being about, not being on the Ebert show and how they hadn't really given him a proper opportunity. And they hadn't. And, Chaz, God bless Chaz and all that. But, it was very frustrating to him. Not so much that he didn't get it, but that nobody in Chicago, he felt, had gotten that opportunity. Because there was another critic in Chicago who had gotten the gig, and Richard really wasn't a critic, Richard Roper. He would have been satisfied with that. But he was for somebody who was so internal, it seemed, given the voice and the gruffness and everything else, he always had this ambition. He always had this sense of scale and what was possible. And he had a kindness. When I was working with him, he goaded me into applying for the National Society of Film Critics, even though I really didn't belong in the National Society of Film Critics, and I knew it. But he was such a fan. He was so passionate about it. He so demanded that do something for yourself. Go get that thing that you should have. I did it anyway, and then of course it didn't work out. But anyway, loved Michael. I'm sorry I missed so much of the last number of years of his life. Honestly, I had a kid and who's now 12, and that kind of distracted me from everything. But it was always happy to see him. And if you took the time to listen to Michael, there was always something you took away that was special. So That was all I had to say.
Absolutely, I agree, Dave. The other thing too is just in the same way he would champion films, he would really work hard to help other people advance, and get it, like you mentioned with the NFSC. He would really go out of his way to lobby on other people's behalf to to help them advance. So I think Charles Coleman wants to speak.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm still the film program director here at Fastest in Chicago. And when I first met Michael, when he first joined the Tribune as a head film critic, he was championing what Fastest was able to do from the very beginning. He was a leading light to all the films I was showing, including not only independent films, but foreign films, retrospectives. Anything I was able to screen, he would try to write something about it. And if he couldn't get into the Friday paper, he would apologize and maybe try to write something for the Sunday paper. And one of the things that was always so charming was when I started arranging these screenings with Stutz Terkel. And I thought it would be a good excuse for two giants of Chicago, both from the literary socialist standpoint and from the film critic position, to have a informed discourse at Facets. And Michael would always be fighting Stutz for the microphone. It was one of those great battles. I mean, it was really funny. And but they always got along with each other famously. All those screenings sold out. People just admired to see these two intellectual giants have the kind of discussions you really don't see today from the public intellectual standpoint. His mom was very underrated, very charming woman, highly intelligent. I always got along with her, and as you well know, Michael was devoted to her. And Michael's scholarship, his love of cinema, dedication to his craft, it just shows you that a lot of these things that people engage upon are like art forms. I mean, you sort of find what you can do really well, you do it as best you can, and you try to broadcast to the world not only your ability to do it, but you're actually able to share your gift with other people. So that's all I like to say about him, and he's greatly missed by myself as well.
Yes, didn't Milos describe going through one of Michael's storage units? Didn't he liken that to an archaeological dig?
It's like Alibaba's cavern. I mean, it was just this. It's like this deep dive. I mean, you know what you're gonna find, but you felt like one of those explorers you read about in ancient history, like looking through the Egyptian tombs. But Michael, I mean, it's just like his mind was like a relevancy making machine. He could just collate data. He didn't bother to sort it, but he didn't have a card catalog going on with his interests, but they were so varied, so dense, such a variety. I mean, I don't know how many storage units he had, but it had to be numerous.
There were 4 total.
But I'm pretty sure that your talent for going through all that stuff, Jackie. It's
no. It was a group effort. Absolutely.
Right at the Indiana Jones.
You can ask Mike and Bud and Dwight. You don't believe me.
But having the archives available is going to be a treasure trove, and there's going to be more stuff to discover about him that people didn't know when he was here. So
it's a really nice legacy. So I'm really happy that we did. And like I said, Mary Hulsbeck was so great to work with. She just made it so easy, and I'm really grateful to her.
And his eccentricities I always thought were pretty charming. It just meant he was an individual.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
you have quirks in physics, and you have quirks when you're a human being. So his quirks were always interesting. So
that's for sure.
He could always write, and he was who has to kind of focus to work long into the night to turn in something, because he wanted to do the right thing at the right time and get it done the way he wanted to do it.
Oh, Janet?
Yes, there you go. Hi. Yes.
Hi.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And I'm just so touched. And Michael, if you're seeing this, I hope you like your reviews. This was just so enlightening, and all the heart and all the thought that has come into this. I became acquainted with Michael later in life, so all this is new to me, and it's so enriching, and I'm just loving hearing all these amazing stories about his professional life, but then also a bit beyond that, all your personal experiences are just beautiful and delightful. And Jackie, I'm so grateful that you were such a champion, and you just amplified what he could no longer really give out, although his essence transcended his limitations. It really did. I was very touched by his sweetness and how caring he was, and how he made you feel like you mattered when he was focused on you. But you were able to amplify and fill in whatever else wasn't there. You translated that for him. You spoke about him in such ways that really did bring forth who he was, that maybe he wasn't able to convey anymore. And I really do appreciate that. And I feel very grateful to have known him at all, and to be a part of this beautiful memorial. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming, Janet. I'm so glad that you were here. And he did have a lot of fond memories of us, either at Laurel Canyon or wherever it was, just, talking and drinking coffee. And other people have mentioned that as well, is that, as prestigious or esteemed as he was, other people that that spoke to me or contributed on Facebook said he always was so humble in the sense of listening to other people. I mean, he really did care what you thought. And he really wanted, someone else mentioned too, he really, really wanted you to like the movie. But he would always, he would, a lot of people talk about them, it's all about them, and they talk about themselves, but he always would turn it back and say, well, what do you think? And he really did listen and want to know.
That's right. Yes. And also I wanted to just say how gracious he was when I did a small favor, and he took us both to lunch at the Roosevelt Hotel in the beautiful courtyard by the pool, in an apartment that apparently Marilyn Monroe had stayed in nearby the table we were at. That felt like such a Hollywood moment for me that I will always treasure. And he was just so gracious about that.
Oh, that's sweet. I remember that.
Yeah.
We're going back to Michael Dare.
Okay. Hi. I just would like to do one thing that no one else has done, which is actually read a piece of Michael Wilmington's writing. This is my favorite thing that Michael Wilmington ever wrote. One day I picked up the LA Weekly, and this review is in the paper. It's for a movie called Silent Madness. Michael Dare has reviewed perhaps 649 slasher movies in the past 4 years, and he's beginning to act strangely. 2 weeks ago, we found him at the typewriter, slashing at the keys with a meat cleaver, foaming at the mouth and gibbering senselessly. We've decided to give him a break. I'll take over the crap detail for a week or two. After all, what possibly harm could one of these bloody, gore-smeared turkeys do to an urban, sensitive, emotionally stable reviewer such as yours truly? This is a big theater, and the audience is acting very strangely. The movie is out of focus. No, it's in 3D, but very bad 3D with little glasses that seem to have come out of a Rice Krispies box. And the film is misframed. I guess the projectionist has trouble watching it. The plot's simple enough. A maniac gets paddled. A maniac gets paddled on the butt by 4 nubile sorority girls, kills them all with a dart gun, then escapes from the asylum decades later and heads back towards his alma mater with a chainsaw. Why is this guy in the 6th row kicking my seat before stalking out? Boy, oh my God, is this bad writing and bad direction and bad acting? Major bad, heavy-duty bad acting. Where's Vivica Linford's in this movie? Why doesn't the projectionist reframe the picture? I'm getting triple eye strain. Nah. You want to know how to spell nah? G-N-N-N. Jesus, what a plot. A university staffed and pupiled entirely by morons, a fat, effete police chief, and a maniac running around in the steam tunnels. Why doesn't the projectionist reframe it? Did something happen to him in there? What kind of people are these? Why am I sitting here watching a movie where a crazed rapist gets an electric drill through his head? In 3D, I can't see. I can't hear. I can't think. Nah, nah, nah. What's happening in the projection booth? Who's in there? Here comes the ice pick. Ah, no. Ah! Michael Wilmington.
Thank you, Michael. And Jen Yamamoto has her hand up.
Yes, hi. Sorry, make sure I lower my hand now. As somebody who really only knew Michael in such a comparative sliver of time, I hesitate to raise my hand to talk, but I did want to share that my appreciation for him as a critic who came up well after he was like so established. And by the way, this weekend with a certain awards happening, this is by far the most star-studded room that I can imagine being in, with all of you other journalists and film folks and programmers who, just like Michael, have done so much foundational and impactful and influential work. I'm like nervous to talk, but Michael was one of the most welcoming people in LAFCA to me and to other younger critics coming up, and I'll really miss seeing him around. Sorry, I get really bad at talking about emotional things, but it means a lot that I was able to listen to these wonderful stories. And also, if I had known that I could get in fist fights with my fellow critics over films and disputed opinions, I would have done it a lot more when I was younger. If I had known that I could get in fist fights and still be remembered fondly for them. So thank you for all of these stories.
It's not too late. You can still get in fist fights.
Thanks.
Let's see.
See Mindy's hand raised.
Hi, I just wanted, I meant to be clapping, but I've got a little baby here, so I just kind of raised my hand, I guess. But I didn't know Michael, but it is so nice to be able to, I met Michael basically through his interviews and being part of the new documentary team that is putting together the documentary that Michael Riano is directing along with Bud Young. And I was so moved by a lot of his writing, as well as the book on Ford, on John Ford. And I'll make it short. I just really am very moved by all of the memories of him, and I think that I wish I had known him personally.
Thanks, Mindy.
Am I coming through?
Bill Swislow.
Thank you so much for putting this on. I met Michael when I first arrived in Madison as a freshman in college, and promptly went to work for his film society, putting up posters for him. But I later knew him at the Daily Cardinal, and then through the Madison years as a good friend. As someone mentioned earlier, it was easy to fall out of touch with Michael, which I did, until he arrived in Chicago to be the film critic and had nowhere to live. So Michael moved in with me for the first weeks or months, and I have to say, if I hadn't found him a place to live, he would probably still be living with me today. It was great having him in the house, but the only way to get him out was to find him an apartment, which I did. And he lived there for the rest of his time in Chicago, I think. But what I really want to say is how amazingly consistent a person he is, because most of what I've heard people say is exactly what I thought about him and knew him for. Although I never saw the fist fights myself, I certainly heard about them through the scuttlebutt. But all the good qualities, the bad qualities. I mean, when I think of what I mostly think of is, on the one side, he was probably the most disorganized person I ever knew. But he was also the most erudite person I ever met, and brilliant. And not, as people have alluded to, not just about movies. His knowledge of literature, of politics, of history was just, astonishing, really. I've never met anyone quite as knowledgeable about so many things and as insightful. So I don't have much to add. The other anecdotes I could tell are probably not kind enough to share here.
they're more the things you share over a drink. But I mean, this was a wonderful tribute, and again, mostly it's that his good qualities just came through so often and so consistently across so many people in so many years. It's been wonderful to hear about them.
That's great. Thank you, Bill. And I want to just say quickly how nice you were when I first started at the Tribune. I joined the financial copy desk, which you were on. You were so nice and patient with me. And I don't know if I ever said thank you for that, but I always appreciated that.
Thank you.
Ziggy Kozlowski.
Yes, I just wanted to say on this Zoom call how good it is to see all the old gang from Chicago. It's just good to see everyone. I just did want to share a funny story because I used to do a film PR in Chicago for like 8-9 years, and then I moved out to LA. And I would always go to visit Chicago. My family was there. My parents were there. And the local publicist, I was very friendly with them. So they would always invite me to screenings. And then I would always cross paths with Michael Wilmington. And I think he just got very confused about whether I was Chicago-based or LA-based. And regardless of where he was, honest to God, he would call me and say, when is blah, blah, blah opening in Chicago? Or it was just funny. And I just think he was a good sort. And it was, I would always be happy whenever I found out that he was going to be reviewing something I was working on. And I just wanted to just say that I have fond memories of him, and thank you for coordinating this. And it was just good seeing everyone.
Nice to see you too.
Anyway, my name is Dave Rubian, and I just wanted to, if Joe McBride is still here, are you here?
I'm here, Dave.
So I just wanted to tell you that.
Oh yeah.
This is the copy I've had for I don't know 40 years.
Oh, thank you.
So it's a great book.
Thank you.
I don't remember the Grapes of Wrath not being in it though. So.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, and Glenn, I'm glad you mentioned the Madison Press connection because I worked there, and I worked there closely with Bob Labraska, who we saw a few photos of in that short movie that Jackie showed earlier. I don't know how many people recognized him, but he was kind of a somewhat important figure in Wilmington's life in the in the early days of Madison. And Bob ended up living in my brother's apartment in New York. And Mike moved to New York for a while, I guess in the 70s, in the late 70s, and he would come by there quite a bit. But back to the, I just have a couple of quick amusing stories to tell about Mike. One is, I think, Dave Polland. You still here?
Dave Polland?
Polland, yeah. You mentioned the Siskert and Ebert show in Chicago, which Mike always thought he deserved a slot on that show. And I remember,
or at least an audition, a proper audition he wanted.
Yeah. And I remember talking to Mike about that, and he complained about that quite a bit. But nobody mentioned that in Madison there was an imitation Siskel and Ebert show on one of the local stations that Michael was on. So I can't remember how long he was on it, but he was one of the people, and I don't remember the other guy. But anyway, one day I called Mike up and I said, "You want to go get a drink?" This was Madison. This was probably 1978 or so, and he said, "Sure." So we I went and got him, and we walked to some random bar, and we sat down. It was like there were booths, and we were sitting in a booth just talking, drinking a beer, and there were a lot of like young, I guess, college women in there, and one of them saunters over to us and zeroes in on Mike and says, "Oh, I see. I watch you on TV all the time. I just wanted to let you know that I really enjoy watching your show. You're about movies," and so then she leaves, and then I start talking to Mike again. But then another woman comes by and also introduces herself to Mike, and same thing. And then they're talking, and then I'm noticing like a line is forming of
young women by our table waiting who want to talk to Mike. And eventually there were like 10 of them. And I'm like, and I'm just like, I just, you know, I can't believe it. I like, 'cause of all the things I thought about him, Casanova was not one of them. And, but here were these like, you know, like 10 cute babes just lined up waiting for their turn to talk to this famous, you know, TV star. And then the other story I wanted to tell was this is about the Madison Press connection that Glenn Silber mentioned. And it was in the evening, and I was there in the office with Mike and also Stu Levitan, who was on this chat earlier, but I'm not sure he's still here. But Stu was a reporter for the Madison Press Connection, and Mike had a deadline for some review he was writing, and which of course ordinarily wouldn't be a problem for him because he could just whip off 4,000 words in like a half an hour, completely off the top of his head, without consulting a single reference, you know, for anything. But he was he was complaining that he was tired, and he wasn't sure if he could write this thing, and he said, I wish I had something, you know, to perk me up. So Stu Levitan goes, oh, I got something that might help you. And Mike goes, oh, what is it? So Stu reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a pill. So he had like, you know, a hit of speed or something. And he said, this might work for you. And so Mike says, yeah, okay, I'll take it. And Stu's like, well, what do you got for me? I'm not just going to give it to you. And so and I'm like watching this whole, you know, thing unfold. And then so Mike like grumbles, and then he goes to his desk, which was at that point partially colonized by all the books that he, you know, gathers over the years, and he's like rummaging around in it, and he pulls out this like huge one, like a huge tome. It looks like an encyclopedia. And he walks over with it to Stu's desk and drops it on his desk. How about this? And so I'm like, I got to see what this is. So I walked over and looked at it, and it was the complete works of William Shakespeare. That's what he was trading. He was going to trade that for a hit of speed so he could write his review.
Jackie, can I enter for a second, please?
Sure.
Yeah, so Michael wrote for all kinds of publications in Madison. I think they've almost all been listed, including the Daily Cardinal. But what I think is the most important publication, and not just for Madison, but for film history, we need to acknowledge the Velvet Light Trap, and a great local magazine. I'm going to ask him to speak in a second, edited by Russell Campbell, who you will see, who has come to us from where he lives in New Zealand to be here for Michael. Michael for the Velvet Light Trap. If you don't know, it was a work of love, local magazine. Nobody got paid, and every issue was on a different subject, from John Ford to RKO Studios to maybe the first issue ever in America on women in cinema. And for that magazine, Michael did his very important Nicholas Ray articles. I think some of his John Ford with Joe McBride was in there. We did the only interview with Warren Beatty in 10 years. That was Michael and I, and that was published in the Velvet Light Trap. So I would like to ask Russell Campbell if he would say something about Michael from his perch in New Zealand. Russell, hi.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. I don't have very vivid memories of Michael, but I know that he was an excellent collaborator, working. He never gave him any problems as an editor on the Velvet Light Trap. I want to take issue with one thing you said. Nobody ever got paid. I edited 8 issues. I edited 8 issues of the Velvet Light Trap. And the 8th issue, I managed to pay people a little bit, though, except for those who wrote the book reviews. They got the book. But so we did make it. By the time I had to leave, we were becoming financially viable to the extent of being able to pay. I do remember one time I returned to Madison, 1975, and I was staying with John Davis, and John lent me his car to drive into town. And I was meeting Michael, and I think we went to a movie, I can't remember precisely, but anyway, we're walking back to the car, and I was putting the key in the door, and it wouldn't work. And a couple of blokes came along and started beating up Michael because they thought we were trying to take his car. I'd mistaken the car. It wasn't John Davis's car at all. But fortunately, he didn't get beaten up too much on that occasion. But it was. Thank you very much, Jackie, for putting this on, and to be able to see old friends is great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We should mention Madison Isthmus was always a home for Michael. There was a wonderful tribute by his editor that was published, very, candid and interesting and multifaceted piece. But whenever Mike, wherever he was, whenever he wanted to, Isthmus was there for him, and they would publish his pieces. And he was, I was just really impressed that he was such an active professional film reviewer for so many years and had a great career doing that for LA Times and Isthmus and the Tribune, other places too, and film magazines, Film Comment, Sight and Sound, etc.
Mm-hmm. And just to touch on, we mentioned Bob Nebraska. Bob was instrumental in getting Michael into LA Style, and he wrote a lot for LA Style. I think that was some of his best writing. Unfortunately, Bob passed away at, I think he was 49 when he died. So he
44.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because I remember that it was the same age as his father.
Oh.
His father had also died of a heart attack when he was 44.
Oh my gosh.
And Bob followed in his footsteps. I know it was really sad.
Yeah.
But I also wrote for LA Style because of Bob.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did a few things for them.
Mm-hmm.
Mike wrote a good piece called The Madison Film Mafia for the UW Alumni magazine, which was online for a long time. It's no longer online, but I think there were about 25 people from our film group there that went into movies, either as scholars or filmmakers. Errol Morris was one of them, and Andrew Bergman, and all kinds of interesting people, and many great scholars came out of there. And so it was a wonderful time and place, and it's great to see a lot of the people back here again. But anyway, anybody else wants to talk?
Yeah, just since you mentioned the Dean Robbins review tribute in Isthmus, I read that this morning, and what got me about that was he wrote about Michael submitting a 500-word, one-sentence review of Rope, given that Rope was a continuous take.
I remember him talking about that.
And I would just love to read it. I copy edited Michael at the Daily Cardinal when I was first a copy editor, when I began my copy editing career. And I had no idea what to do with Michael's writing. It just defied punctuation. And so I would love to find out if this Rope review is still available somewhere, because I would love to give a try to reading it to see how it was. I have a feeling Michael's sentence construction improved over the years, or else his editors did. But I would love to see that review.
I remember him talking about that, but I don't know that I have a copy of it anywhere, but he told me about it, and I'd like to find it somehow.
Well, Dean was here, at least was here on this, at this service earlier.
Okay, well, I am in touch with his editor, Judy, so I could ask her if she would let me have his email and ask him if he passed by any chance, or maybe Judy would be able to get access to it if it's in their archives.
That would be great to read.
One legendary aspect of Mike's career has not been mentioned, the nude Peter Pan, directed by Stuart Gordon, who was going to make a movie about that, but he never did. Unfortunately, Stuart's no longer with us. But Michael was not naked in the play. He played John, one of the middle-class children who is transported to Neverland. And it was an amazing production. I saw it when he had 10 naked women dancing to Inagata Davida by Iron Butterfly, and with colored smoke and stuff. And it was a parable of the '68 Democratic Convention, which I went to with Mike and Stuart and Carolyn Purdy and a few other people. And it was great. And then the police shut it down and the DA shut it down. It became a big political thing. And we put it on at the Wisconsin Film Society. We were supposed to show Buster Keaton film that night. And we showed instead this bare stage show that Stuart kind of whipped together, with no set and no scenery. It was kind of inspired in my mind by The Cradle Will Rock, the Orson Welles extravaganza that had to go on, without sets and actors except standing up in the audience. But anyway, Mike was wonderful in that play. And the next day, Ralph Hansen, the chief of police in the campus, called Michael and I in, and they wanted us to inform on who were the two girls who danced naked. Only two had the chutzpah to dance naked at that fraught performance. We all thought the police would burst in at any moment. And Mike and I just refused to, of course, identify the two girls. And Ralph said, okay, see you guys later. And then we were disconnected from the university as the official film society. As a result of that, we were punished in various ways, but we were very proud of putting that on. And it's too bad Stuart didn't get to make that movie, but Michael was a key figure in that play.
Jackie?
Yes,
John and Jill Iltis.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Hi, Jackie.
Hi. This was really fantastic. I can't believe how many people you have put together here today. Being a publicist in the business was always interesting, and it was always lots of fun for us. And you just talked to Ziggy Kozlowski. I mean, we've been doing this for years, and I just want to thank you very much.
Yeah,
absolutely. I remember running into you in between screenings, and I know you were always so nice to Michael, and he was very fond of you, and I have fond memories of the two of you.
And Jill loved talking to his mom. At the screenings, and afterwards she was fascinating.
Yes, I really enjoyed her very much.
Well, I remember she was a big champion of mean streets.
Yes.
And you just wouldn't have thought that, that doesn't seem like it would be her cup of tea, but she actually had very artistic taste, and she really was kind of underappreciated, I think, for all the talents and accomplishments that she had.
I just want to thank everybody. It's wonderful to see this.
It's been very enlightening. We've learned a lot about Michael that we did not know before. So thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you for coming. It's good to see you.
Stu has Stuart.
Am I on now? There we go. I personally have no recollection of extorting a book from Michael in exchange for drugs, and I will, on advice of my lawyer, I will deny all allegations and the alligators. But I want to reinforce something that Mike Fellner posted in the chat. I'm not sure if you all saw, and that is to reinforce how important Madison was in the formation of Michael. With all due respect to Chicago and Los Angeles, I think the number of people and the number of strong recollections about Madison really highlight how important that time period was in his formation, in his development as a person and a writer. And one more point on the nude Peter Pan. Among the people in that performance was Andre de Shields, who also did not entirely disrobe, but was an important factor in that production as well. So thank you.
Well, I was looking for a copy of the Rope review that people were talking about.
Oh yeah.
And I found a comment on his obit in the Isthmus that somebody wrote that I thought was actually very enlightening about Michael. It says Mike was weird Even in a time when there was much weirdness in the world in general, and Madison in particular, Mike was kind of a benchmark of weird. He kept me on the phone for 2 hours once, complaining about the negative review I'd given him in the Cardinal for his performance in the Screw Theater production of Virginia Woolf, insisting that I must have a personal vendetta against him. But I suppose that evened out when I had to suck his thumb when he was playing one of the darling children in Peter Pan, and I was Tinkerbell. That was from Howard Waxman.
Another Michael credit that's kind of important is after the zoo story, I thought, well, we had such a success with that, I should now do Long Day's Journey into Night. You know, what the hell? I mean, not realizing this is probably the most difficult American play to put on, very long and complex. And Mike was going to play Jamie, the part that Jason Robards made famous. And we thought it would be clever to put it on in the Catholic church on campus because it's, you know, O'Neill had such problems with the church. So we started doing it. And I quickly realized I didn't know what the hell I was doing as the director of this play. And I just said, oh, geez, you know, Mike, could you take over and direct it? And he said, okay. And I bowed out and I came to the first production, and he did very well, and you know, the other actors are very good too. And the only distraction was when Mike was not on stage, he was wandering around behind in the church. He would sort of circle around in the background. It was kind of a little distracting to see Jamie in the background all the time. But hey, Mike directed A Long Day's Journey into Night. How many of us could say that? That's pretty terrific.
Just by coincidence, Michael would love to go to the theater, really anything that I wanted to do. He was always up for doing anything, as people have said, even when he got sick. But the last play that we went to was Long Day's Journey into Night here in Los Angeles, with Jeremy Irons as the father. So it's kind of a funny coincidence there. But he did love to go see live theater or hear music. He loved to go to the Hollywood Bowl. He loved to hear live music, see live performances, go to screenings, go out to, I mean, he really was so interested in the world. He would just be up for anything.
We were going to do Othello with Andre de Shields at one point. We asked Andre, and for reasons it didn't work out, but Mike would have been a great Iago, and Mike was very up for playing Iago. Could you imagine Mike as Iago? He would have been.
Yeah, I can.
But I wouldn't have known how to direct that play either, but we were trying anyway, you know.
Yeah.
I have one more for Fisticuffs and Madison story for people who seem to want to hear both of those. There was a terrible moment in Michael's life, which many of you know about. In the student union at Madison, a crazy person, for reasons we still don't quite know why, smashed Michael in the head one day and sent Michael into the hospital for many weeks. It was terrible. Michael came out, and for a while after that, he had this white bandage all around his head, which looked sort of, sorry to say it, like the Frankenstein monster. At the same time, dear Joseph McBride was a reporter for the Wisconsin State Journal, and one day while he was reporting on the street, some guy punched him in the eye, and Joseph had a black eye. And sure enough, several days later, the distinguished British film critic Robin Wood came touring America, and he arrived in Madison, and he was very, very anxious to meet the distinguished young film critics who had written the book on John Ford, that is Joseph McBride and Michael Wilmington. And I witnessed this in the student union. On one side of the table was Robin Wood, and on the other side of the table were Joe and Michael. And there is Joe with a black eye, and there's Michael with this thing wrapped around his head. I have no idea what Robin Wood thought, but what a weird, weird meeting.
Well, one of the great things about that meeting, I brought Robin Wood to campus because I wanted to meet him, and he gave lectures on Preminger and Nicholas Ray, and he was a wonderful guy, a great critic. But he met Richard Lippy there, who became his partner for life. Right. And he was a fellow student of ours. And so we changed Robin's life for the good there. And it was another memorable moment with Wilmington. Yeah, that was a terrible incident when poor Mike was hit in the head. He had a metal plate in his head. I remember this. And but he recovered from that. It was miraculous that he went on to such a great career after that injury. He was a survivor. He was like the Energizer Bunny, wasn't he? I mean, he kept going.
Even though he was, as people have said, he was very disorganized, but somehow he always landed on his feet.
Jackie, I just wanted to mention, because they mentioned the story about when he was hit in that
About,
mistake.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, when Michael was hit.
Oh.
One of the things when we were doing the documentary, he would say to us, to me and Bud, he would say things about how, I'm having some difficulty writing. This was kind of towards the end. And I'm convinced that hit affected him later, both when he had certain operations with anesthesia, and then once he had Parkinson's, he was not, he was in trouble, I think, because of
Well,
that.
anytime you have a head injury, you're set up,
Yeah.
later in life, or anytime after that, your chances of having brain problems and issues, it's just, your chances are much, much higher. So I'm sure, I can't imagine, I don't know, but I can't imagine that didn't somehow trigger the Parkinson's.
But he would talk about that a lot, later.
He did.
Yeah. I have one other funny story. I don't know if Bob Storino is still on, but I invited him to a New Year's Eve party once. And I swear Michael slept through half of it once he sat on the couch. And it was real sweet in a way, because it wasn't a real big party, maybe 20 people, and things were swirling around him. And he was just asleep on the couch. He was on such a, sleep deprived schedule getting his things done. That's when I knew he was the hardest working film critic that I knew.
You could say he was the hardest working film critic, but it seemed like his writing was so easy for him. And, he literally could sit down and write a huge article in such speed. It just boggled the mind. And without using any checking references or anything. It's really when I realized he had to have a photographic memory. Jackie, do you think would you say he had a photographic memory?
I would agree.
Yeah. Because otherwise I don't see how anybody could possibly have done that.
Right. And he would be able to quote from books and films and, just boom off the top of his head. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and his mother, Edna, mentioned that when we interviewed her. She said from when he was a child, he'd read something and then he'd be able to quote things from Shakespeare and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And another shout out to David Poland. When he wrote for Movie City News and he wasn't edited, he could write these great long reviews, which were like pages out of a book.
Oh, he was edited. Editing Michael was always interesting because he'd have these expansive runs, and then you he'd kind of roll back into something else. And sometimes you really had to, help him shape it a little bit, but it was always fascinating to read it. And Ray Pride, by the way, took a lot of that weight in the last couple of years of Michael writing for us, and really kind of became his de facto editor on a weekly basis. And, but it was great to have his work. And also he would write video reviews and he'd go back in time, and those were great too. So yeah, but he did get edited a bit.
And one other thing which came out of the archives, which is fascinating, Michael did an hour-long audio essay for the Criterion Laserdisc copy of Robert Altman's Shortcuts. He had left a working Laserdisc player in his storage, and we have now archived that. And that's the only place it exists. It is not on the DVD. Thanks to Bud Young and Dwight Irwin for helping with that. So that's something that will be archived.
I hope you do a crowdfunding for that, Michael, for that film, and put up a website. Jerry might be able to help you because he's an experienced documentarian who's done that for his own films, and that's a good way to get this film finished.
For the love of movies, thank you. And that's why I said, everyone, please put in your email in the chat or find us at Michael Wilmington Film Critic on Facebook.
Jerry, maybe you could tell us about your John Ford moment with Mike in your film For the Love of Movies. It might be a good way to kind of bring it to a suitable sentimental ending here. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know how many of you know, but I made a film about the history of American film criticism. And it featured Michael as sort of the prime example of a wonderful critic who was being passed by in the new hip, cool, hep, fast cut age. And it dealt with his leaving, being fired from the Chicago Tribune. So I have a scene which is an homage to John Ford. At the end of The Last Hurrah, if anybody has seen it, the hero of the movie has just been not reelected as the mayor of Boston, just as Michael has been removed at the Tribune. And Spencer Tracy walks one way across the screen, and all the other celebrating people of the new candidate walk the other way in opposite ways. And I did a sort of a tribute. I had Michael walk the opposite way from the new world in my movie to show that something really essential is being lost in America when great critics like Michael, great culture figures are being passed by. So that was my last hurrah to Michael. And maybe, as Joseph suggesting, maybe we should wind it down. And that was, we love Michael, the last hurrah. What a great person, great critic, great everything. Jackie, you want to have the last words?
Sure. I was just going to ask quickly, Chaz had mentioned that Edna had made films. I just wonder if anyone else, if that rings a bell with anyone else, because I wasn't aware of that myself. And I don't know if there's any copy of those available.
Well, I don't think so. We did not find them in storage, but here's something for Madison people. If anybody has an idea, we did not throw away Edna's artwork, and there's some incredible things that we would like to figure out how to donate, and I could probably truck them up to Madison at some point, because they were just too precious to just donate all of it or throw it away. So anybody in Madison has any ideas, we have that. But no, but if you're still on, I don't think they ever came up in the archive. I think they might have been lost, possibly in one of the earthquakes or one of the moves from Madison, when Edna had to move on her own probably.
Mike, what about the idea of using some of that and selling it to raise money for the movie?
That's a wonderful idea. And most of my team, I think, is still on. And we're going to come up with ideas, and we're hoping to figure out how to get the podcast going. He could talk to Juliette Binoche for an hour. I had one tape, we talked to her for 90 minutes. The podcast would be incredible if we could figure out how to do that, either during the crowdfunding or later. So there's all kinds of things. But thank you. I didn't catch your name, but thank you.
Okay. I just want to thank everyone for coming. And as we've all covered, Michael was a very special person, and I miss him dearly. But I'm just grateful that he was in my life. So thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, Jackie, for organizing it and for being such a loving friend and being with him at the end. That's so touching and so meaningful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Great to see everybody here. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to see everyone.
Thank you, Jackie. You've done an incredible job.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you,
Jackie.
I didn't do it alone. We all.
Who knew we were going to go 3 hours? It's very Mike.
Thank you, Jackie.
It's like one of Michael's reviews.
That's true. They were always kind of a journey when you'd read these reviews and take you all places you didn't think you were going.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Fantastic.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.